This meeting is being transcribed. This meeting is being recorded.
All right, good morning. Welcome, everybody. My name is Andy Bonner. I serve as the chairman of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy. Today is Tuesday, May the 2nd, 2023, and I'd like to call this meeting to order of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy. This regularly scheduled meeting is taking place in room 1A of the Davy Crockett Tower, 500 James Robertson Parkway in Nashville, Tennessee. The meeting date, time, and location have been properly noticed, and copies of the agenda were posted to the Board of Accountancy website on April 24, 2023. And I ask at this point, Karen, to do a roll call and confirm that we have a quorum in the room.
Andy Bonner.
Here.
Janet Booker Davis.
Here.
Pam Church.
Here.
David Crenshaw.
Here.
Larry Elmore.
Here.
Greg Gilbert.
Here.
John Griesbeck.
Here.
Kevin Monroe.
Here.
Gay Moon. Here. Rob Vance.
Here. Righty, thank you. At this point, you know, we're so blessed here to have such a great talent and pool of people that serve on this board, that help us in the Board of Accountancy, and great employees. And sometimes we lose somebody, and sometimes we get people. And in this situation, I'm so excited that we have Neil Stauffer with us. Neil is going to be our new attorney for the board. And Neil, I'm going to give you a moment just to grab a mic and tell us a little bit about yourself here.
That's right. Great to be with you all, and I'm looking forward to working with you. Began my legal career as a JAG officer in the U.S. Army. I still serve as a reservist. Did tours at Fort Bragg and Fort Campbell, and then left active duty, went to work for the health department as assistant general counsel, and then with the city of Clarksville as assistant city attorney. So it's great to make this move now back to the state and be with you all. Look forward to it.
We look forward to working with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
I want to remind everybody in the room, if you got your cell phones, to go ahead and put them on silent. Also, we have thousands of people watching online and listening to us. And in order to make sure that we can all understand later when we go back and look at it, or even as they're listening, make sure you got your mics in front of you and they're on when you speak. I have to lean into mine so you can hear me. So just be cognizant of that as we go through the meeting. Let's see here. Do we have any visitors or members of the public? I know we've got Kara and we've got Dan, and both of those are we're going to ask both of them to come up and say something.
Chris is with legal.
Right. And Chris. Pardon me, Chris. All right. With that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Let me get this open here. I'm going to go through an agenda, adopt it. So I need that as a motion, as an action item.
So moved.
Have a second? Karen?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to make it clear that we are going to have an update from TSCPA, and that'll be after Dan's presentation from NASBA. That was a late addition.
Righty. So I would ask Mr. Monroe with that addition.
I still so move.
Okay. A second?
Second.
All righty. Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck. Aye. Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon. Aye. Rob Vance.
Aye.
Next on the agenda is the approval of the meeting minutes. Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Chair, the minutes are included in the package, and so we just need to approve them, please.
May I have a motion?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon. Aye. Rob Vance.
Aye.
Next on the agenda, we've got Wendy Garvin. I would like to say that I did a straw poll last night, and the entire board thinks that we have the best executive director in the entire nation. So Wendy does a great job. She coordinates everything. She's building an absolutely unbelievable staff. Wendy, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have in advance, you received my executive director's report, so I'll just walk through some of these things, and if you have questions, feel free to ask. We can do that at the end as well. I've started out there with future meeting dates. The first 4 there have already been approved, and then I've added a tentative date for July of 2024. We can vote on that at the end of the report. An update on NASBA meetings. The Eastern Regional meeting is coming up here at the very end of May, 1st of June in Savannah, Georgia. Andy, Greg, Kevin, and Pam and I are planning to attend. The Western Regional is in Kansas City, Missouri at the end of June, and Larry Elmore plans to attend that regional meeting. He had a conflict with the Eastern, so.
Oh, y'all didn't want me to go with you is what it was.
And then the annual meeting is October 29th through November 1st in New York, New York. So we can talk at the July meeting about who would like to attend that. Duke and I attended NASBA's ED and Legal Conference at the in Tucson, February 27th through March 2nd. The nice thing about this particular meeting is that we have executive directors, we have legal counsel, we have investigators, and then we also, NASBA invites the state societies. So I believe there were something around 30 state society executive directors there. So it was a great opportunity to network, collaborate, have discussions with the societies on issues affecting the profession. So in addition, there's an entire legal section or programming at that event, so investigators get some good information there. We had a new presentation from an individual at the SEC, which I really enjoyed hearing about enforcement with the SEC. It also gave us a good contact should we ever need to talk through things with the SEC. We now have a really good contact for that, so I enjoyed that. One of the other sessions we heard from Dr. Grace from Alabama and his perspective as a professor on the profession and what he's seeing, and that was interesting as well. So a variety of good programming. NASBA's committee interest form or process is underway. You can submit your interest form through May 5th, so you just have a couple of days to do that if you haven't done it yet. I note there, if you want to go back through your emails, or if you need, I can send you an email as well. But I believe the initial request was sent out on March 1st with another email on March 22nd and April 5th for you all to state your interest. If you already serve on a committee, you still have to put your interest in again. So please do that. And I do appreciate everyone's commitment and participation, because it does really help this board, and as we do at every meeting, we have updates from those committees, so I know a lot of you have served in that capacity. State-specific ethics course. That course is now available on TSCPA's website. A link was emailed to each of you for awareness back on April 14th. There are several sponsors that have been approved to offer that course, and those individuals or those groups are listed on our website with contact information for that. Outreach. The following outreach events have occurred since our January meeting. I attended an MTSU auditing class during their ethical leadership week and talked a little bit about licensing, some of the basics, and then got into some case studies on some actual cases that you all see and the results of those, and talked about the public interest as was the theme really of the presentation, and who the public is in each of those cases. And so I had so much engagement in that class. I was very pleased with that session. So probably about 30 people there. So I think they combined a couple of auditing classes. On April 5th, I did TSCPA hosted a virtual CPA 101 event, which we've done a couple of times a year. This time we focused on evolution and how that came to be, and then of course a lot of specifics on what's coming up as we transition to the new exam. And then the last part of the outreach there is just the various task forces or committees that I've been involved in, and all have been very active recently. So the AICPA Board of Examiners, the NASBA CBT Admin Committee I mentioned yesterday, Pam is on that group with me, and we will be meeting in Raleigh on May 18th and talk a lot about the implementation of the model rule change and what that would look like for states to help give some guidance to states. NASBA Amnesty Task Force, I've been involved in those discussions, and that will, you'll continue to hear more about that. And the ELE Advisory Group, which Dan will talk about here in a few minutes. I did just attend a BOE meeting this past week. So historically, the Board of Examiners, or Mike Decker, who's the VP of Examinations with AICPA, will do a quarterly update, and executive directors are invited, but then board members can attend and listen in as well. I think Larry's done that before. Well, they kind of quit doing that, I think, with all that had been going on with CPA evolution. They kind of forgot that they were doing that or weren't doing that. It wasn't on the schedule. So they're going to get that back on the schedule so that if you all want to listen in to what's going on, you can certainly do that. But let me give you some highlights on some of the things that I heard last week. So the good news about scheduling for tests is that in Q2, they're up 5 to 7% from the prior year. Q3 and Q4 are still early. There's some good positive numbers so far, but it's really early for scheduling test sections for those. But of course, we would expect an increase in volume given the fact that we're transitioning to a new exam and people want to get some of the sections over with. At this point. So the other notable item is that scheduling for BEC is historically about 20%, and it's up to 24%. Anyway, they're seeing a good increase in BEC, which I think many of us expected. That's the section that will be going away. And so folks are, if you take that and pass it, you won't have to take one of the discipline sections. And so that was some interesting news. New candidates in the pipeline is still really at the lowest it's been for really since the computerized exam, but we're hopeful to see some increases this year, and then evolution helping to take effect like we had hoped that it would do. Candidates passing the fourth section actually dropped in Q1, and they're not sure exactly why, but something to continue to monitor. We went through heard a lot of updates about CPA evolution and the amount of work that they're doing to transition, to communicate with folks, to get candidates ready, to think about setting passing scores. So there was a plethora of information at that meeting. So if you have any questions, I can certainly try to answer them related to that. But I will move on in the executive director's report. The next item is just an update on renewals. Of course, the period is winding down. The expired grace period ends June 30, and you'll see some statistics there as to how many individuals are still in expired grace status. Active CPAs, we still have 476, and then firms, we still have 52 individuals in expired grace. We're fairly consistent with prior years, maybe a little bit higher. So we will do a last-ditch effort in June to reach out to these folks and try to get them to renew. The CPA audit, we are about to start that process, so we expect to communicate with those that have been selected on or around May 15th. We'll choose 10% of licensees from the 2021-2022 period. There is a new performance management cycle. So typically state employees have received kind of an annual review in September each year, with compensation being given in January, and they are adjusting that schedule. It looks like to be more in line with the fiscal year. So this year is going to be an abbreviated where we will give performance evaluations in July with compensation being given in September. So item to note, performance metrics, you will see there our days to license, our case and complaint performance, and our online adoption rate. The most significant item there is you'll see that our goal of 90% to resolve cases within 180 days has dropped a little bit from 100% in January down to 89%. And of course, that's the transition with our investigator and not having somebody on board. So we are a little bit behind, but we will get caught up. I can't say enough about Duke's work in getting our backlog handled and being very efficient and thorough about the investigation. So I really appreciate that. And then you'll see there new licenses issued. Typical, we had 127 individual licenses issued in Q1 and 22 firm permits. And then down at the bottom, I did not have new information yet for 2023 on new candidates on the CPA. I believe I received that late Friday for Q1. And we were around 117 individuals, new candidates, which is typical for the first quarter to the prior year. And then you have the overall licensing population on that last page of the report. And then at the end of the report, I also received examination data for Tennessee and nationally for the entire year of 2022 and 2021. So there's a lot of statistics there. And I really haven't had a chance. I got it late last week. I haven't had a chance to really delve into it and look at it very closely, but it is there for your information if you want to take a look at it. And if you let me know. That concludes questions. I can take them.
Have any questions from the board for our executive director? Good job. Well presented. We have a proposed date of Tuesday, July the 30th, 2024, for our next meeting in our sequence. I have a motion to.
Moved.
Second.
Second.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe. Gay Moon. Rob Vance.
Aye.
Up next, we've got Dan Dustin. Dan is a CPA. He's vice president of NASBA. He's also in charge of the state board relations. And I've gotten to know Dan over the years through working with NASBA, and I think several people on this board know him from committees. Dan is a fantastic representative of NASBA. He's heavily involved in a lot of things, and we invited Dan to come talk to us. It's been a while since we've had somebody from NASBA because of COVID. Dan has a great story with that. I'm sure he's going to share with us, and the fact that there are COVID kind of memory losses or happenings that kind of pop back in your brain. You think it's been that long, and but we're very excited to have you, Dan, and welcome on behalf of the Tennessee Board.
Thank you, Chair Bonner. Appreciate the introduction, the kind words. I have to echo what you said at the introduction about how wonderful your executive director is. I sit through many board meetings over the course of the last 12 plus years I've been with NASBA, and certainly having that well-documented report of all the things that are going on serves this board well. I also have to thank all of you for your participation in NASBA. Certainly I recognize a lot of folks and your involvement either going to NASBA meetings and conferences or being involved with NASBA committees. I often say, really to the boards that aren't as actively involved, that NASBA as a membership organization is only as strong as its members' participation and you certainly are a prime example of a board being actively engaged, and not only bringing what your board is doing to the national front, but also having the ability for you to understand what's going on nationally and bringing it back to Tennessee. So I thank you all for that. What I wanted to do today was really talk about 2 or 3 different things, different topics. And I'll pause between each, and please feel free to interrupt me along the way. Sometimes I get on a kind of a roll and we'll go forward with things. But I invite you to ask questions. I really appreciate more interactive sort of presentations. It allows me to share information that I may have somewhere tucked in the back closet. But unfortunately, you open the door, you never know what might come out. You might get more than you want, but there's a lot of information in here somewhere. Let me start with the UAA and the Model Rule 5-7 that was about really conditional credit for the examination. And you may recall that back in the fall we had an exposure draft really focused on when conditional credit would start. And historically, a lot of boards of accountancy had used the test date as the start point to calculate going forward. Back in the fall, we suggested moving that to the date of score release. And I think a prime example of that is really going to be what happens with CP Evolution in 2024. There's going to be testing under the new model, the CPA Evolution Aligned model, in January of 2024. But because of the number of exam sections given, there are going to be score delays. And so you may not have your actual score released to you until April or May of 2024. So under the old rule, your time, the clock for your 18-month window would start in January of 2024 when you sat, but you wouldn't even know if you passed or failed that exam section until your score was released in April or May. So it really made sense to tie it to the score release date rather than the exam sit date, so that the candidate benefited, and certainly the boards benefit because you don't have to give extensions all the time. So that was really what we did last fall. We had a couple of boards of accountancy give us comment letters, and they were supportive of that change. However, knowing that there were other changes and certainly a lot of focus on pipeline in the profession, we're looking and we're getting input on other changes that could be made. And certainly the other was the change of perhaps 18 months to 24 months. So back at the January board meeting, Ken Bishop, NASBA's president and CEO, discussed with the board the prospects of changing that 18-month conditional credit window to another period, perhaps 24 months. After some discussion, ultimately the board said, yeah, we think that's a good place to be with respect to an exposure draft. So that was a special meeting of the board in February. We released it for 60 days because there were a lot of folks saying we got to do something. This is going to help the pipeline. It's one of many factors that could help the pipeline. So we did it for a 60-day comment period that ended on April 17th. The Uniform Accountancy Act Committee met on April 17th to review the comments we received. What was interesting was that we received more than 850 comment letters to that exposure draft. Certainly far more than any I can ever remember in my 24 plus years history, being both with the New York State Board of Accountancy and NASBA, primarily because 5 or 6 state societies started advocacy campaigns on their websites where they did outreach to licensees and students asking them for input. Many of the state societies requested 36 months conditional credit. So we got to the end of the comment period. We heard in total from more than 20 state societies. We heard from about 20 boards of accountancy. Boards of accountancy were mixed. There was one that said 18 was fine. There were 3 that said 36 was a good number. And there are a whole host of them that said 24 is good, but we'd also accept 36. And I want to thank you. While you did not submit a formal letter with respect to it, your input certainly was considered as part of the process. We actually spoke about that at the NASBA board of directors meeting as well. So certainly the input of the boards was very important. During the board meeting on April 21st, there was a lot of discussion about the period of time. Ultimately, the board decided to, on a substitute motion, adopt 30 months. And we shared that with everyone on last Monday. Shortly after the decision was made, we felt it was important, given the interest amongst everybody, that it get out there. I will tell you, however, that I have heard from numerous executive directors around the country that they wished they had more timeline to prepare themselves for the onslaught of inquiries they were getting from candidates with respect to that motion by NASBA. And certainly the timeline of the press release. I will tell you, I did speak with the executive directors in early April. They have a monthly call. I did walk through that timeline, but in hindsight, it probably would have been good for NASBA, and we recognize that it probably would have been good for NASBA to provide an email or something to the executive directors, perhaps a week before the NASBA Board of Directors meeting, to say, hey, this is coming. You know, we don't know what the number is going to be, but it's certainly important that you know that you're going to probably get inquiries. I will tell you, the inquiries are not only associated with the boards of accountancy, but we're seeing them also, for example, through the CP Evolution website, which we have this email address that's still out there, feedback@evolution.org, cpevolution.org. So a lot of interest in this change. I've heard different models that are being suggested by some boards. I think really what you hear, and there's other things I'll talk about today that are of keen interest to a lot of boards and a lot of state societies, is uniformity, and certainly uniformity and not an impact on substantial equivalency. These changes will not impact substantial equivalency. I'll talk about some legislation in a bit that potentially has an impact on substantial equivalency. One of the couple of things that we were asked about, one was data. We've had, some folks, some boards ask about data to support going from 18 months to 24 or 36 or whatever the number is. And we've talked about this for the last 2 or 3 months, that there is no data. If you think back to what occurred back in 2004, we went from a paper and pencil exam with a 36-month conditional credit window where candidates could sit for the exam 6 times in that 3-year period. We made the change in conditional credit in 2004, and we've never done anything else. It's always been 18 months for the past 20 years. So there's no data to say, is a number better than 18 months? Certainly now with this rule change, we'll be able to do more data collection and work going forward when we look at the 30 months to see how that compares to 18. One of the main concerns we heard about going to 36 was procrastination, and the fact that potentially, life happens, whether it's, students graduate from college, they begin taking the exam, they get married, they have aging parents, they start families, they have job changes. A lot of things happen across the spectrum of candidates. And so we really focused on that procrastination factor. One of the things that historically is out there that you can look at in the old candidate performance books that were prepared by NASBA through 2019, there's demographic information, and it actually shows pass rates by segments of the age of the candidates. And you can see that individuals who sit 21, 22, the pass rate is significantly higher than those who sit at 30 and above. So you see this slow declination by the segments that are presented in that book. So we were concerned. The longer they have, is that going to hold them in some ways at disadvantage of passing the exam? So I think that's really where we are right now. I think Wendy mentioned that the CBT Admin Committee will have a meeting coming up. One of the things that'll be talked about is there a way that we can provide to boards of accountancy a mechanism to more uniformly adopt this. And I will tell you, there are boards right now that are talking about adopting a rule change as early as December of this year. There are others that I know, just because of the regulatory environment in which they work, it's going to take them 2 years or more to get a reg change. I spoke to a state yesterday afternoon who a lot of their details, rather than being in rules or in statute, and they envision it's going to be at least a year before they can get the next legislative cycle before they can get a law change made. So we're looking at how can we at least get most folks uniform so that the candidates themselves are held harmless through this process. One of the other things I talked with the executive directors about in early April on their call was the fact that, you know, they and the boards really have to consider the individuals who are going to be caught in the middle. Not only is education transportable, but so is the exam. That you don't necessarily want to inhibit somebody who passed the exam in one state that might have a more liberal or early adoption of 30 months to not transfer their grades to a state where they might have taken longer to adopt 30 months and they still have 18 months. So there's a lot of considerations that boards of accounts need to make as we transition from the 18 to the 30. I'll stop there with respect to the rule change before I move on. Any questions?
I'd just like to say that we've gotten a lot of positive feedback in Tennessee from the firms and from the candidates and stakeholders to say that they're really excited about the 30 hours. In fact, as all executive directors have, Wendy was sharing with us that we've gotten a lot of calls about it, like when is this going to change? And so we actually have on our agenda today to adopt a rule change. So we appreciate the effort that was made on that and excited about the change that could be coming.
Thank you. One of the other things we certainly learned was that when we put out a press release, make sure almost you put in bold writing that this is not effective until the Board of Accountancy in your jurisdiction adopts the rule change. I was actually reading a headline today. I actually belong to both the Tennessee Society and the New York Society because I'm licensed in both states still. And the New York Society put out a headline that NASBA adopted 30 months. And I'm like, that headline is just totally wrong. It's up to the New York Board of Accountancy to adopt 30 months. So just, and my fear is, you know, we're all in that 10 to 30 seconds of time, you know, the elevator speech on information. And I'm afraid, you know, candidates are out there reading that headline and they just assume they have 30 months now, and that's certainly not the case. So, you know, it was a learning experience for us. Certainly the impact of having 850 comment letters on an exposure draft was something to behold as we process those. Any questions? No, I'll move on. Okay. So one of the other things that I certainly want to talk about was the Experience, Learn, and Earn, or the ELE program that NASBA is working with the AICPA. And it was really a program focused on addressing the hurdles that candidates face or students face in getting the 150 hours, whether it's a lack of resources, that being certainly dollars and being able to pay for that fifth year of college, or time that they need to get out and get in the workplace and earn a living. Certainly a lack of awareness of options to get to the 150 hours. I think a lot of students, master's degree, the master's degree not required. It's not. I don't believe it's required anywhere, but it's certainly a prime option. I have a master's degree in accounting, so I'm not going to say that isn't an appropriate way to go. And certainly lack of attraction to the profession. And certainly if you look at anywhere from social media or the movies or television shows, accountants are not portrayed in a very positive light. You know, we all tend to, I guess we all have back at our homes our green eye shades and whatever the case may be. So what we did is we looked at other models. We looked at the EY and Holt University model. We looked at the PwC Northwestern model and the PwC St. Peter's model. And each are different. in the way they operate. Some result in a master's degree, an MBA degree. Some result in internship hours that count toward the extra 30 hours to get to 150. Certainly, one of the things we considered was the fact that a number of boards of accountancy do not allow 30 hours of 30 hours of internship right now. The old rule was 6 hours of internships, which was amended in October of 2020 to move to 9 hours, 3 hours in accounting, 3 hours in business, 3 hours in just the general 150 hours. And there have been some boards that have done that, but there are boards like New Jersey and like New Mexico that will allow unlimited number of internship hours. One of the concerns we had with the St. Peter's model is that if you go to school in New Jersey and you get your 150 hours in New Jersey, you potentially can't transfer that to another jurisdiction. So we wanted to make sure that your education was portable, that it wouldn't restrict you, that you wouldn't have to see boards do regulation changes to have your education accepted in that jurisdiction. Our three principles were that it had to be cost effective, and for us we were working on it had to be at a community college per credit hour cost or less. It had to provide up to 30 hours of rigorous education, coursework, and it had to be scalable to firms of all sizes, because right now those programs I mentioned are all programs from Big Four firms that they've created. So we wanted to make sure that even the sole proprietors, the small partnerships could participate in the program. What we said was we wanted individuals who had graduated with a baccalaureate degree and had their core accounting coursework already taken care of. That we have done some early outreach. The AICPA, working with both the major firm group, which is the top 100 firms in the country, as well as the G400, which are the top 400 firms in the country. They did some informal surveying of firms, and there was some initial interest in that. We're also in the process currently of surveying firms in those groups, as well as the smaller firms in PCPS, to identify firms who are interested in participating in the pilot. And we're actually in the process right now of working with a school to become the pilot university, if you will, for that first year. Our goal initially was to get 500 to 1,000 employees, and they are employees, they're not interns, they would be employees of the firm to participate in this program. One of the other things we're going to be doing is issuing a request for proposals to solicit other colleges, universities who may be interested in participating down the road after that first year pilot program is done. So we're certainly looking potentially at graduates and people who became employed after December of 2022 and certainly May of 2023, working both with the school and the employers to get them in. They would be full-time employees of the firm. The firm would give them time to take the coursework they need. That certainly means they're earning a salary as well as eligible for benefits. So it's a positive for the student/employee. Coursework would be completed asynchronously in a virtual environment. So you'd be taking coursework. Perhaps we're all in a classroom, a course, taking that course together, but through an asynchronous means that we have a deadline to complete it, but we could complete it at our own timeline, knowing that we have that deadline. So that's a positive. And then, one of the other things that we've been asked is, well, if you're in this program and you're working and you're going to school, does the experience earned while working count toward licensure? And we're not promoting that as part of this program because it's really up to the boards of accountancy to make that determination. We have some boards of accountancy that view internship hours or work while you're going to school, as this program would be, as being what's called double dipping, that you can't count your education coursework and the experience earned while you're earning that education essentially twice, once for education, one for experience. There are a lot of other boards that say we don't care, these people are full-time employees of the firm, that should count for licensure. So really it's a board decision ultimately on you would treat those. So that's really a high-level overview of ELE. I tell you, I will be presenting a little bit more background, digging in a little deeper at the regional meetings coming up in a few weeks. We think it's important to share as much information as we can with the boards about the program and where we are as we proceed down the time. Any questions?
I will say, first of all, I could discuss this for a long time. I actually wrote a paper about 5 years ago about my perception of the direction we were going and whether the extra 30 credits were truly incremental, because as you know, now students can earn 12 hours, up to 12 hours for the CPA review courses, which they were taking outside of the education process. So that gets up to half of the extra 30. And then if you fill the rest with internship, particularly if those internships are essentially the first year of work, then what have we gained by the 150? I'm not opposed to the 150. I should say I'm a professor, but so it, you know, it's great. But I'm at Christian Brothers University. I had retired from Rhodes College in Memphis, and we discussed in this meeting last time that Christian Brothers, our dean, was very interested in participating, but we had envisioned an integrative experience where the school would establish an experience where the faculty would essentially mentor, as of course the firms would mentor, and there'd be more interaction. We had a Teams meeting that Kara set up for us with Julia Warsaw from the AICPA, who's handling this program, and we learned a lot about it. And really, it's not appropriate for small schools. What she described was building a library of courses that would be asynchronous remote. And so students would simply pick the courses and take the courses either from one or more schools. And we asked her specifically, would faculty be involved in any mentoring? And she said, no, the firms would really be doing the mentoring. So we came away from that perceiving that it really is not an appropriate model for a small school, and particularly the cost. If you can only charge what a community college charges, then we think it will be an online university or community colleges. And of course, community colleges already have asynchronous remote. And we kind of raised the question, how's this different from students who take courses through Coursera? Why do we need a whole new bank of courses? There are courses out there. If it's not an integrative program, then what's the advantage? Now, I can answer my own question somewhat and say, well, the firms are buying into this. The firms are giving them some time to do the courses. I also asked Julia, do you perceive that students would be taking their CPA exam during this time? Because Tennessee, as well as other states, allow people to sit while they are finishing up their 150. And she said yes. So they'd be working, taking these courses, probably taking a CPA review and preparing for the CPA exam. She said, based on a survey, the courses would focus on, not on accounting courses, that it would focus on people who had completed accounting already, and there would be soft skills such as communications or something like data analytics. To which I thought, well, I don't know if communications is best taught asynchronously remote. And if it's something like data analytics, are we doing them a disservice by not giving them graduate credit? Because I know from watching my own students that sometimes they hit a wall if they don't have a master's degree, even if they have the 150. So that's some of my input, and I will not take your time any more than that, but I'd like to hear your response, and I'd also like to hear, we're afraid it could diminish our numbers in our graduate program, frankly.
Those are great comments, and you may have noticed I was taking some notes because there are some things there that certainly I think are important to address. And yes, I think the easy examples for us are soft courses like communications and data analytics. But I'll tell you, we have a weekly call, and one of the things we talked about was, well, what if you had an auditing course that is not, that initial auditing course, but a second auditing course, and would that count or not? It's not. And I think we were generally saying we should not exclude accounting courses. The goal is to have individuals with baccalaureate degrees and their 30 hours in accounting participating in the program. But if there are other accounting-like courses out there, like a second audit course or a governmental course or something else that they may not have had at the undergraduate level, why not allow them to take that? I guess I never thought about the fact that individuals may go to different schools as part of the program, because we've always talked about potentially having a 10-year or a 20-year, a 10-hour, a 20-hour, or a 30-hour set of courses, because I think many of us recognize that individuals today don't graduate with 120 hours with a baccalaureate degree because of AP courses or just the extra course load they may take during their 4 years in school. Again, the faculty mentoring to me is, we haven't talked about that to a great extent. We certainly want to make sure that there's somebody at the firm side, since they are an employee of the firm, to make sure they're making their way through the program. So you raise a good question there. I think ultimately, though, it becomes, and I agree with you, it may not be for all schools, because I think it really becomes, at that credit hour cost, I think it becomes critical that volume is important. But then when you have volume and you have a professor teaching a course, are there graduate students who are assisting that person? So if we do the pilot and there's 500 people in the pilot and you have one professor doing a course, or the courses, how many people are taking that course and how are they supported by the internal structure of the school, by graduate students that are assisting him in answering questions and doing other things? So I think there has to be some sort of interaction. It's not just you're going to sign on and take the course. I think there's got to be some background, some facility there at the university also. Again, it's why it's a pilot. Questions come up. They're great questions, and I think they're things that need to be, considered. Thank you. I will tell you, I shared this with the Virginia board, and we're live streaming, but I'll tell you, I mentioned I have my master's degree. I was an engineering student for a period of time, and then the school and I decided you best find something else to do, because you're really not going to be building bridges. If you are, you're not doing a very good job of doing it. So I became an accounting student and got my degree in accounting, but I did it so quickly I didn't feel prepared, and I got my master's degree in accounting because I wanted that extra coursework. There's a true benefit to getting a master's degree. I saw it because you really, every course I took, all 10 courses I took during that period of time, required me to have some method of communication, whether it was written or oral communications. And when I see that, one of the reasons or the rationales for going 150 hours was to increase the communication skills of CPAs, yet we're, 30 years down the road and we're still talking about the lack of communication skills of CPAs. It's something that's important. And certainly I think at a graduate level, and hopefully even at the undergraduate level today, we're seeing more of that, and it benefits the profession down the road. But again, Pam, thank you for your comments. I know you've emailed me and Colleen about the Christian Brothers, and I'm glad you were able to connect with Julia.
We really appreciated it.
Valuable input. I appreciate that.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So if we're okay with ELE, I'll go on. One of the interesting things that, and please, if I'm running out of time, tell me. I can take a back seat back here. One of the things that's really been interesting in the last 4 months or so has been the legislation really that was introduced in Minnesota that created 3 pathways to licensure. Certainly every jurisdiction today has the 150-hour requirement, 150 hours of education, 1 year of experience, and passing the uniform CPA exam. And a lot of times people get confused about what substantial equivalency is. and it's really that. It's passing the exam, it's getting the 150 hours of education, and getting the 1 year of experience. What's been interesting to me over the course of this dialogue over the last 4 or 5 months is that the one pathway is 1 year experience, 120 hours and 2 years of experience, which is the old model. Yet if I step back 3 or 4 years ago, before we were concerned about the pipeline, people were saying 150 hours and 1 year of experience is not enough. We need more experience. So I'm not sure how going to less education and just 2 years experience is enough either. But that's the model that Minnesota has adopted. The third pathway that is in their legislation is 120 hours, 1 year of experience in CPE, which again, CPE, there's a lot of ways to get CPE. It's not really defined in the statute of how they would do that, but I'm not sure how 120 hours of CPE would equate to 1 year of education at this point. We had some concerns. We shared those concerns with the Minnesota Society of CPAs. In February, NASBA Chair Rick Reisig, Vice Chair Stephanie Saunders, and I went to a meeting of the board of the society, shared our views based on what the UAA says, and they were a little surprised because they believe that you could, if you had less education, you could increase or meet the same level or minimum level by increasing experience and vice versa. And we explained no, that this three-legged stool is really viewed each individually, that it's 150 hours of education and it's 1 year experience and it's passing the exam. So we certainly, at the same time, we're looking at the limitations of things like internship hours, and a lot of the discussion since then, there's been some other societies who are talking about possibly some other changes and things that they want to do. We'll be sharing a letter in the next couple of days, I think, with another society that's got a proposal or is considering proposed legislation. And again, we're concerned about the impact it's going to have, because under their proposed legislation, they would maintain the current uniform 150 hours of education, but through reciprocity, they would let others in that have a lower standard. And so we're trying to understand how you reconcile maintaining a level for the students or the candidates in your jurisdiction, but then others that come in with a different standard would be allowed to get licensed and practice in that jurisdiction. So we have some concerns about that legislation, or proposed legislation as well. It's really just a high level. We continue to have dialogue, and I think you're going to see some more. We have a session at the regional meetings talking about pathways, because there's a lot of different pathways that are out there, and we talked about some of those today between ELE and internships and the three big core programs that are out there. There's other models that are out there across the globe, so we'll be talking about a little bit of that at the regional meetings. But I don't know if any of you have any questions about the legislation and what's been going on. I know we shared with the boards what we've sent out to the Minnesota Society. Any questions on that?
I'd like to comment that your thoughts on substantial equivalency. It seems like the world is coming to America and the jurisdictions and saying, "Hey, how did y'all get mobility? How did you pull this off? Because for a profession, this is fantastic." And just kind of comment a little bit about the legislation and what it would do to Minnesota, because I sure wouldn't want anything like that to come to Tennessee. And just comment on that.
Mr. Chair, it's interesting that not too long ago at a NASBA, I believe it was an annual meeting, we had a speaker from the Federal Trade Commission who actually acknowledged the accounting profession and the mobility model and the ease of practice across state borders. And certainly when Wendy mentioned the large number of state society execs that were at the executive directors conference this year. When you talk to all the stakeholders, no matter who they are, mobility and substantial equivalency are key to everything we do, that nobody wants to see us lose that. What's interesting is you look at Canada. They have 11 provinces, but they can't get agreement to practice under mobility amongst those 11 provinces, but somehow we did it with 55 states and jurisdictions. So there are other professions that reach out to us and want to know, how did you accomplish that? So I think it's great that the boards, that the societies recognize what an achievement it was to get substantial equivalency and mobility. And certainly we want to make sure that we don't run afoul of that as we try to address concerns about the pipeline. And I think that's really what it is that we've seen this shrinking population. And frankly, the demographics aren't that it's just accounting. If you look at high school graduates, the number goes down. I think the trough is in 2025, 2026, and then we come back out again until the mid-30s. But it's not like everybody's avoiding accounting. If you talk to the professions, and we've talked to folks like the architects with NCARB, they acknowledge that they're struggling to attract students as well. You look at community colleges and you look at the trade schools, and they're suffering and not seeing people as well. So as an accounting profession, we have to recognize that we're in a very competitive situation right now, not only with the other licensed professions, but with the trades and with other occupations that individuals can go to now. I was surprised to see how much a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber makes today. And frankly, they do it without incurring 4 or 5 years of education. They go to a trade school. So, there are alternatives that people are looking at. There's alternatives that this generation are looking at that have an impact on all the licensed professions, not just accounting. I will tell you that, certainly the European countries look at us as well and look at mobility. One of the other things that came up during the discussion of legislation and 150 versus 120 hours of education was a comparison of the U.S. model to the European model. And I think what there was a lack of understanding of the European education system and the licensure model. We go to school for 12 years, graduate, go to college, university for 4 or 5 years. There they have a 13-year program, they have a 3-year college program, but in accountancy they also have an integrated education and experience pathway. It's almost like an internship, but there are firms that are registered with the government, with the licensing body, to actually provide both that education experience component to licensure as a chartered accountant. And certainly, those are all things you got to consider in this day and age. And we'll talk about some of that stuff. But again, I think mobility, substantial equivalency is just special and unique to accountancy, and something we all want to make sure continues. Thank you. The last thing I had, unless there's another question, the last thing I had really, and you guys spoke about this a little bit earlier, was the amnesty program. And really, it was the discussion that really came out of the pandemic. Certainly last summer we talked about a change in the conditional credit window for those who have conditional credit as of December 15th, 2023. They all get an extra 18 months through June 30th, 2025. And right now, 54 out of the 55 boards have adopted that policy. One still has one. It's interesting. There's a board. Maine is the board, and to serve on the Maine board, you have to be a practicing CPA. Last summer, 3 of their members retired. So suddenly they all had to resign from the board. So they had to go through a process of having new board members appointed in Maine to get a quorum to then pass some rule changes. So that's the reason they're not there yet. One of the things we wanted to look at certainly was the disruption that the pandemic had on the candidate population, those taking the examination. So we went back and we looked, and we estimated that it could be more than 15,000 candidates who had started the examination process and ultimately didn't complete it during that period. So one of the discussions was, could we look back to 2020, and could we look forward into 2023 to those individuals and potentially provide them with an opportunity to come back in, reinstate their credit, come back in, take the examination, and complete the licensure process, certainly due to, as I said, the disruption of the pandemic. There's a task force that was created by NASBA's CBT Administration Committee. They're talking about it. I think a survey is or has gone out to the boards of accountancy to solicit some input on that. Certainly there has been some concern that has been raised about the reinstatement of credit in some jurisdictions. And again, it'll be another topic we're going to do a deep dive on at the regional meetings. But I want to at least give you a little bit of flavor for some of the discussions that are going on at the task force level, because it does impact, certainly all the boards of accountancy.
I think you make a great statement there. We had a discussion yesterday. In Tennessee, we're just allowed to bring 5 board members out and travel, plus our executive director. And to emphasize what you just said, NASBA at these regionals and annual meetings, you really go through and talk about a lot of the subject matter of what's happening in our profession. And as we all know right now, our profession is really changing by leaps and bounds with everything that's happening. And I appreciate everybody's involvement with the committees, as Wendy said, or just taking your time to go to these meetings, because there really is great subject matter. You're getting to talk with peers across the regions and states, and even an annual across the entire nation about thoughts. And what I have found is that NASBA pulls us all together and allows us to communicate at a level where we can agree on things quicker and change things quicker. And I think that's a testament to Dan and the leadership of NASBA. But we appreciate that opportunity to get together. I know that there are a lot of boards that bring their entire board to those meetings. We're very blessed that Tennessee lets us bring as many as we do. We would love to have more, and maybe one day we can. But I think it's a great opportunity to break into regions and talk about issues, and so it's a fantastic opportunity for the boards.
I think at the regional meetings, the regional breakout sessions are very valuable because it's an opportunity for example, the Tennessee board to meet with the other Southeast region states, so your contiguous states and others in the region, to talk about issues, what you're seeing, what they're seeing, and how you and they react to those situations. So I think in some ways that's the most valuable piece. I hate to say it, but it's very valued by the member boards to have that level of discussion at the meetings.
And one question, if I may, just going back to your substantial equivalency discussion and comments. We've seen what happened with Minnesota. We also, I think, I was grateful to receive kind of copies from NASBA of the correspondence that was being sent to the various constituents in states that were considering doing things like Minnesota ultimately did. But as we sit today, and Chairman Bonner mentioned how highly we value mobility and reciprocity here in this state. What are the odds of more slippage, if you will, in terms of other jurisdictions doing things similar to what Minnesota has done? And how concerned are you about, our hard fought for, nationwide mobility just slipping away?
There's certainly this great question. There's certainly concern about it. Because we are aware that, it's not only Minnesota who introduced legislation, but there's 3 or 4 other state societies who are looking at possible methods of addressing that. It's certainly focused on the pipeline. It's a reaction to the pipeline. But there's no silver bullet that's going to solve the pipeline issue. And certainly all these things that we are doing and we continue to do will, hopefully all have, the sum total will have an impact. But I think everybody, I think the good news is everybody recognizes the importance of mobility and substantial equivalency. I think if I go back to the executive directors conference, when you go to a NASBA conference, there's presentations and there's an opportunity to ask questions most of the time, unless we get long-winded and we run over a little bit, and that happens. Like we all do that from time to time. But to me, one of the things we did at the executive directors conference was we adjusted the agenda, and we basically put a couple of sessions on hold to just do Q&A, first for a half hour and then a full hour, to allow everybody that input from the floor to share their thoughts, their ideas, their concerns, to have their voice heard. And to me, that's the most valuable thing that we need to do. We have to consider what is Minnesota trying to resolve, and is there a way to resolve it? And I think we're on the pathway of doing some of those things, but I think ultimately the goal is to do it in a uniform or a more uniform way so that we don't ruin the mobility and the substantial equivalency we have. But it's a great question.
And can I say one more thing about that? I'm not sure people stop and think about the impact on the colleges and universities when these changes come forward. So when the white paper from the Big Six, or however many firms there were, came out for the 150 credits for licensing, the model proposed was more general courses, undergraduate, more critical thinking and liberal arts, etc., and moving the more technical accounting to the graduate level or the fifth year. And that has shifted back and forth. So things like allowing students to sit during their fifth year creates a demand for shifting the technical ones back to the undergraduate. And certainly this 120 says you got to do everything on the undergraduate that you need in order to pass the CPA exam. And of course, the ELE, you've got to think about and make assumptions about, okay, where are they picking up their credits? And certainly I've seen shifts in how the students are doing this. So many schools, at Rhodes, 80% of the students are from out of state. So you're trying to meet the needs of students who are going back to various places. Most became certified here, but I'm sure New York, so many of their schools draw from, all over the world. So it's a cost and a burden to the universities and colleges when these things shift. And it's not a matter of, oh, okay, now you can sit with 120, just come on in. Well, the students haven't had their credits because they were planning to take that on the fifth year. And I just hope that consideration's given to the impact on curriculum and hiring accounting professors, et cetera.
Yeah. And when we first started this project and periodically throughout it, as I mentioned, we meet on a weekly basis with respect to this as we're moving down the timeline. But we do have the AICPA's academic and residents engaged in what we're doing in the academic team from the AICPA. And certainly there's outreach to AAA with respect to some of the things we're doing as well, just to make sure that they're aware of some of the discussions we're having. But you're absolutely right. One of the things we learned through CP Evolution is that much like boards of accountancy can't change statute and rules on a dime, neither can education change their education model. We're all more aircraft carriers than we are speedboats when it comes to this stuff.
I didn't realize that.
Honor, thank you very much. I appreciate it today.
Can I make one question or a comment and then a question? First of all, I want to thank you Dan's a great resource for whether you're serving on a committee or on NASBA's board or whatever. Dan knows a little bit about everything on NASBA's side. And knows a lot about a lot of things too. So I want to thank you for your help with me, in particular in my situation. But talking about the pipeline issue for just a second. You know, those of us that have been in the profession for centuries have seen the ebb and flow of the pipeline come and go. And there's always been a concern about finding a good number of candidates to hire and so forth. But you know, one thing that I see, and this is not related to any one or any one firm, but one concern I have is that firms who are having trouble finding CPAs or CPA candidates have kind of taken the attitude of, well, you can pass the exam if you want to, but we really don't care as long as you're here working and getting the work done. You know, when I was coming up through the firm, you had levels where you couldn't bump up any higher until you passed the exam. And I see things like that being removed just so people won't leave. In other words, we don't want you to leave just because you haven't passed the exam. Just stay here and keep doing the work. Crank that work out, and we're fine. So I don't know that there's a solution to that other than I see a change in the attitude at some firms where there's not that incentive to pass the exam, which could be part of the pipeline issue.
You're absolutely right. It's a great comment. It's interesting. Again, I mentioned generational differences, and you know, we've had a lot of focus on the 150-hour requirement and the impact that might have. But there was an AICPA survey back, I think, around 2015, 2016 there, and then the Illinois Society did one a couple of years ago, and it isn't the education. That isn't the factor. That ranked like number 7 on both survey lists, that it's really more focused on work-life balance and salaries today than anything. And then you're absolutely right. I can remember when I was in public practice, you know, it was like if you wanted to become a manager in the firm, you had to get, and I was not an individual who passed the exam, you know, 4 sections on 4 tries. It took me a little effort to do it. And part of that motivation was the fact that if I wanted to advance in the firm, I needed my license. So you're absolutely right that is a component of that pipeline. Yeah.
How do we fix that? How do we get the firms to put more emphasis on attaining the CPA certificate?
That's not an easy. That's really a business model thing. You know, what's interesting, Larry, is that, you know, certainly as a profession we have the reserve service financial statements, but certainly firms do a whole host of things, and there are tax-only firms, there are firms that focus on personal financial planning and other things, and they don't require a license. Ultimately, you need 51% ownership. You have private equity entities coming in and buying accounting firms, at least the non-attest assets of firms. I've seen some presentations where some of that activity is creating a marketplace for younger individuals to be CPAs. So perhaps as the profession evolves, that too will bring some of that back in. I think, you know, we're going through this process where many of us around the room today are going to be retired in the next, you know, 10 years or so. And so you have this vacuum of the baby boomers retiring that you're going to have to bring more people into the profession, and that's certainly part of the pressure we face today as a profession. But at the same time, we have to do a better job of selling, if you will, and selling is probably not the best word, but selling the opportunities that are out there in the profession, not only today, not only the breadth of things that we can do, but also the career opportunities that are presented to people over the course of the next 30 years of their careers.
And I think some of this started a few years ago when there was, you know, the firms hiring people with majors other than accounting just to get the personnel in there. And so those folks are not interested in passing the exam or even qualified to pass the exam, but they're getting a lot of work done. You know, I was at the dentist the other day, and the guy, I had changed dentists. It was a new guy. He didn't know much about me, and so he said, I see where you were a CPA. He said, my son just graduated from college, and he's working for XYZ firm here in town. He said he doesn't have a degree in accounting, but they had him doing 1040s this tax season, and they're going to figure out what they're going to do with him, but he loves it there. And it's a good example of, you know, the firms just want people to work, and the certificate is somewhat important, but you don't see the significance that it used to be within the firms. And this is nationwide. I mean, it's not any one particular firm.
You're correct. Great comment.
Thank you, Dan.
Dan, just want to appreciate you coming out and updating us today. There's a lot of things happening in NASBA. Just for the board already knows this, but just for our listening group, we're so blessed to have NASBA in Nashville. What a great addition that was when you came to Nashville. Y'all really do hold up the volunteer state, and the fact that we hear noises down here about you volunteering to host international groups to come into Nashville, and they use the facilities at NASBA, and just doing such a great job for the state of Tennessee and the state of Tennessee on behalf of the board and the state. Thank you for all that you do at NASBA, and thank you for NASBA being here. And we're just excited to have you kind of walk over. We're glad you got to walk over and see us.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Great to see you all.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and a lot of things that Dan talked about, our next speaker or probably was going to say some of that too. However, you know, Dan got there first, unfortunately, or fortunately. But Kara Fitzgerald is here. She's with the president of the Tennessee Society of CPAs. We've asked, with the amendment today, we asked Kara to come in and talk to. I just can't tell you that we had Kara and Wendy really worked good together. And, you know, got together on April the 25th, the leadership of the Tennessee Society and the board. And we're really blessed in Tennessee to have a great working relationship with our state society. I talked to other boards across the states and jurisdictions, and not everybody has that relationship. But in Tennessee, we're very fortunate to have two dynamic leaders in Kara and Wendy, and they really do a great job representing both organizations, and we're just blessed to have that experience here. And with that, I would just say, Kara, please come up and join us. And if you have any thoughts or statements, please let us know. We're going to try to make this a normal thing. We're also going to try to get the leadership of the TSCPA and the board together more than once a year and kind of share ideas and thoughts. And because there's so much changing in our profession, we've got to have that open communication. NASBA encourages that. Dan talked about it. And I think that you can accomplish a lot of things when you have that open communication. So, Kara?
Thank you, Chairman Bonner, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. It's not lost on me that the relationship that the Tennessee Society of CPAs has with our State Board of Accountancy is unique, and I'm very grateful for it. I'm reminded through our leadership meeting last week and my attendance at the NASBA Executive Directors Conference with Wendy and Duke that we can accomplish so much more when we work together. So thank you for this opportunity. I'm just going to update you on a few things happening at TSCPA, mainly an update from our Board of Directors meeting that occurred last Friday. But before I get into that, just to touch on a few things that Dan covered, and I'll be brief because we did overlap in our topics quite a bit today. But I want to thank the board for consideration of the rule change to expand the exam window from 18 to 24 months. While the Tennessee Society did not issue a comment letter to NASBA on that particular topic, it was not because we were opposed to an extension of time. It was simply that we did not have data to support one position or another, whether that be 24 or 36 months, but generally we're supportive of some expansion, and much much like Wendy, have already had very favorable comments from our members about the potential for change. We will be very careful. I've already thought about that, of being very careful in what we publish to not create confusion to students and our members. So when the time is right and that rule hopefully does get implemented in Tennessee, we will be sure to help publicize that information. Also want to thank you for your consideration of the extension of the internship hours from 6 hours to 9. I know that's not been formally approved by the board yet, but that's something that I had been talking with Wendy about, and I think is an important step in looking at alternative ways to make achieving the 150 hours easier for students. Now moving on to our TSCPA Board of Directors meeting. Last week, we spent a lot of our time updating the board on what we accomplished during our last fiscal year, which ended on March 31st. Much of what we did in the last 12 months focused on pipeline. We ramped up our student initiatives during the past year. We did 46 high school presentations to almost 1,700 students. We did 12 elementary and middle school presentations to almost 600 students. So our outreach was far and wide, and we look to continue those efforts during the current fiscal year. We invited Sue Coffey with AICPA. She serves as the CEO of Public Accounting, and Julia Woislaw from AICPA to present to the board on the Pipeline Acceleration Plan, or the 8-point plan as it was called initially. That plan, as drafted by AICPA and NASBA, outlines 8 main points. I've heard those may be expanding to maybe 12 points to really tackle some of the challenges that we are facing as a profession. It was very helpful to the board to get a better understanding of what is included in the Pipeline Acceleration Plan. TSCPA did issue a formal response to draft version 2 of that plan, generally in support of the 8 points. We are now on version 3, and I understand a new version will be coming out. The board spent most of the time with Sue and Julia discussing the Pipeline Acceleration Plan, really focused on that Experience, Learn, and Earn program, which Dan discussed. As Pam mentioned, I had already met with faculty from Christian Brothers University and AICPA to learn a little bit more about that program, and that was very helpful, I think, to answer a lot of questions. And while it may not be a good fit for certain size universities, I am still encouraged that the Experience, Learn, and Earn is something that we should consider in Tennessee as an alternative pathway for students who may never have had a master's program on their radar, as a means of trying to get new candidates into the pipeline. So that is something that we continue to explore, and we'll certainly look to the pilot program to learn how we might be able to implement that in Tennessee, assuming that we have colleges and universities and firms that are interested in participating. The board also discussed the recent conversations around the 150-hour requirement. Of course, over the last several months, I have had multiple conversations with our volunteer leadership, Chair Jeffrey Stewart and Chair-elect Jonathan Bailey, and have been, part of many meetings at the AICPA, NASBA, and then with my peer group from across the country. And the opinions on 150 hours certainly vary greatly across the country. Tennessee has prided itself on being a leader. We were one of the first states to pass the 150-hour requirement. We also were a leader in passing mobility. And so while I don't think that our history should necessarily guide our next steps, I do think it's very important to consider what we have done in the past as we determine how we move forward. The board discussed the 150-hour requirement, discussed substantial equivalency and mobility, and believes that those are very unique aspects of our profession that we are fortunate to have, and that to dismiss the importance of having mobility and substantial equivalency could potentially do more harm. The board also discussed that the accounting profession has a long history of attracting the best and brightest, and at a time when more is expected of new staff in CPA firms, it's probably it should be considered whether educational requirements should be reduced as we continue to expect more. We also discussed the fact that there are large numbers of candidates who leave the pipeline after passing 1, 2, 3 parts of the exam, and those numbers are sizable. Those candidates knew about the 150-hour requirement and still chose to pursue accounting and to pursue CPA licensure, yet at some point in the process determined that they wanted to leave the CPA pipeline. We don't know what the causes of that is, but it would probably be a safe assumption to say that there are other factors that are not being considered, such as culture in the workplace, salary levels, and the perception that, work requirements or expectations are unreasonable, and that those things need to be explored in addition to things like the 150-hour requirement. After a lengthy discussion, the TSCPA board was in agreement that they are in support of maintaining the requirement in Tennessee, and they adopted a statement of position just so that our membership and licensees in Tennessee are aware of where the organization stands, given the current debate. And so I'm just going to read that statement of position that the board approved. TSCPA supports the 150-hour requirement for CPA licensure as currently required in the United States. The CPA profession is facing a critical shortage of individuals pursuing accounting degrees and CPA licensure. But we do not believe that reducing the requirement for licensure will have a meaningful impact on the CPA pipeline, and that the potential risk far outweigh the potential rewards. TSCPA recognizes that the pathway to 150 hours is not a one-size-fits-all, and we support current efforts to develop various alternatives to obtain the additional hours. While TSCPA supports the 150-hour requirement, we encourage stakeholders such as AICPA and NASBA to continuously analyze whether the requirement is achieving its intended goals and whether those goals are still relevant. So that's the position of the TSCPA Board of Directors. I think that last sentence is very important, that I think hopefully we all agree that because a requirement was put in place many years ago, maybe we do need to look at what makes up those additional hours and whether it is achieving the intended goals. And that's why that wording of continuously analyzing is so important. So while we support the 150 hours, we do think that we should continuously be making sure that it is intending the goals that were initially set out. The last thing that I'll report on from the Board of Directors, and I'm very excited to report this, is that they voted to make a financial contribution to the Center for Audit Quality's Accounting Plus initiative. This is an initiative that was started last year, and it is a program to really promote the opportunities available in accounting to populations that may not have an awareness. Primarily Black and Latino student populations. Many state societies, CPA firms, and other organizations have pledged financial support to that program, and so TSCPA is very pleased to join as a partner. They're very active on social media, kind of meeting the students where they're at and putting out some really great content for students to see to inform them about accounting. So we are happy to be a partner with them and hope to be able to share more with you on that in the future. And then lastly, as Wendy mentioned, the state-specific ethics course for 2023 is out and available. We've had several sponsors who have already purchased that content. We were very fortunate to work with Dr. Perry Moore again this year in updating the content based upon the outline that this board approved. He does a phenomenal job, and always pleased to work with him. So I thank him for his efforts. He truly has a passion for that course and for the content, and is just a wonderful person to work with. So thank you for his efforts on that. That concludes my update. Are there any questions or comments?
I'd like just to hit on a point. In the 8-point plan that the AICPA issued, they talked about providing scholarships for students. And I personally know that Tennessee Society of CPAs has been a leadership in that area. But, for our listeners here today, maybe you can talk about what the Tennessee Society is doing there and the leadership role y'all take in that area.
Yes, very happy to do that. That's always something I welcome the opportunity to talk about. So TSCPA has a long history of supporting accounting students through our scholarship program through the Educational and Memorial Foundation. And that's only possible through the support of members who make contributions and have pledged support through our Life Associate program. Last year, we awarded 111 students in Tennessee $285,000 in scholarships. The board approved funding for scholarships last week, and that will be in the range of $250,000. Last year, we awarded 6 students $25,000 each, which is just truly life-changing, and so grateful to be able to continue that program. Applications are currently open, so if we have any students or faculty who are listening to the meeting, and please encourage those you know to apply because we want a good candidate pool to be able to select from this year, and those will be made in July of this year.
I can honestly say when I got to that part, I went, check, we do that already. So very proud of what the State Society does for our stakeholders in Tennessee, and very excited about that scholarship program. Any other questions for Kara? Well, thank you, Kara. We appreciate you coming and talking to us. I may at this time just ask, why don't we take like a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and get into the meat of our committees that we talked with yesterday and bring that to the board. And so we'll 15-minute break. We'll be back.
This meeting is no longer being recorded. This meeting is no longer being transcribed. This meeting is being transcribed.
Welcome back.
This meeting is being recorded.
Sorry, I didn't wait for the second. Welcome back. We're going to get started back on the board committee reports. Just as an overview, the Board of Accountancy met yesterday at 1 o'clock. We went through our 4 committees with our chairs as leadership, and we covered licensing, and we covered laws and rules. We covered enforcement, which we had a robust discussion of many things, and our chair, Kevin Monroe, did an excellent job of leading us through that. And our executive committee met, and so we'll start today with a summary of those reports, and I'm sure that we will have some motions here to bring forth before the board, and we'll start with our own licensing, Dr. Pam Church.
Thank you, Andy. We only have one request today for an exception. This is from Rami Shukri Nasif, who has asked for an extension on FAR taken November 2021 and would expire May 11th, 2023 without an extension. Rami was on family medical leave for 63 days outside of the country from May 20th, 22 to July 22nd, 22, and therefore was unable to study for the exam or sit for the exam as Rami was in Egypt providing care for a sick mother. So has requested an extension for those 63 days, and we do have appropriate documentation of the medical situation, the airline ticket for the travel to Egypt, etc. So the committee has moved that we extend FAR to July 31st, 2023.
All right, so we have a motion. We don't need a second since it's brought forth as a committee motion. Do we have any discussion? Seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert. John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Thank you, and thank you, Dr. Church. We appreciate that. Next, we have our laws and rules. Mr. Larry Elmore is chair, and so we'll ask Larry to give us a review of what they did yesterday and any motions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. The Laws and Rules Committee met yesterday and discussed 3 rules which we are asking for approval to change or submit for change. The first one is rule number 0020-01-.066 related to the change in the time of expiration of past exam scores, which we have discussed already this morning from other folks. But this rule will substantially change the time period or the window to pass all the sections. Is a change from the 18 months to 30 months. Also amends the starting date for the window clock to start. Moves it to the first, at the date the first section scores are released by NASBA, either to the candidate or to the board, and the window ends or closes on the date the candidate sits for that final section that got passed. There's also some removing of some information that was in the old rule that's not applicable anymore. Some windows and some exceptions, but that's primarily what the change relates to. So I think we're asking for approval from the board to submit that rule to be amended, and we have 2 others that we. You want to just talk about one at a time or what?
I think it's fine to include them all together.
The second rule, rule number 0020-01-0611, relates to a rule that's already in place in Tennessee related to expiration of scores after 10 years. And the present rule states that that a candidate who has partially passed or has passed portions of the exam, after 10 years, those scores would go away and not be applicable anymore. This rule, over the years, we've had a few candidates ask for us to allow them to bring those sections back alive, and so hello. Go ahead.
We're sorry, your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number.
Welcome to the audio conferencing center. Please enter a conference ID followed by pound. Sorry, I can't find a meeting with that number. Try entering your conference ID again and then press pound. Sorry, I can't find a meeting with that number. Try entering your conference ID again and then press pound.
I don't think your clicks are corresponding with the beeps. I'm hearing you clicking, but I'm not hearing
There's
it all
such a
beep.
delay, isn't there?
Sorry, no current meeting matches that information. Please contact the meeting leader for assistance. Goodbye. Welcome to the audio conferencing center. Please enter a conference ID followed by pound.
If you're the meeting organizer, press star now.
After the tone, please record your name and then press pound. You're now joining the meeting. Please wait for the leader to... You're now joining the meeting.
This meeting is being recorded and or transcribed.
Janet Booker Davis.
Is now joining.
Hello, Janet.
Hello, I'm back in.
Awesome, thank you. All right, I think we're... Go ahead.
We're back.
I just said thanks. I think it's back.
Yeah. Okay, I think we're ready, Larry. Thank you.
I want to welcome everybody back in. Sorry for technology bugs, but as we all know in the virtual world during COVID, this does happen. So, Larry, continue on.
Okay, the second rule that we're talking about, or that we discussed yesterday, is rule number 0020-01-.06 related to examinations. And this rule has been in place several years in our law related to expiration of scores that are greater than 10 years old. And so in the past, a candidate who wanted to ask for reinstatement of those scores, which has happened a few times over the years. It's not a common thing, but it does happen. So in last month's meeting, and then again yesterday, we discussed submitting this change that would allow for persons who were asking for that reinstatement to apply with the board, and rather than having to come before the board for approval, it would be approved if they submitted evidence of 80 hours of CPE, applicable CPE, including 2 hours of state-specific ethics. And so once this application was submitted with the proper documentation, would not have to come before the board for approval. The third rule that the committee discussed yesterday is rule number 0020-02-021C related to education. And this amendment would change what it used to say. Well, it's changing to say that not more than 9 semester or equivalent quarter hours may be internship programs. However, of the 9, a maximum of 6 quarter hours may be applied to the 30 semester or 45 quarter hours in accounting. Now, yesterday the committee changed the only change we made since yesterday was submitting the word equivalent prior to the last mention of quarter hours, or the second mention. So the committee yesterday voted to submit to the board for approval these changes, and we would like for the board to consider that.
All right, so we had a motion brought forth that doesn't need a second since it was brought forth from the committee for changing of rules. So this is our discussion period. I would like Wendy to kind of go through the process of this is a notice of rulemaking change. We have to have a hearing and just kind of give us a timeline, because I know that we have a lot of stakeholders in Tennessee that will be watching this, and so they'll be able to access this recording and understand exactly the process that we'll take forward and to change this and to bring it into law. So Wendy, if you'll go through and just kind of give us an idea of when we think this time frame will happen. And of course, everything's subject to change, but we have kind of a more likely than not timeline. So if you can update us on that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes. If the board approves these rule changes today, that starts the rulemaking process. So what happens is legal will draft up a document for internal parties to review and approve. I believe then it goes to the Attorney General's office for review. I think, as Laura mentioned yesterday, they review it pretty closely to ensure that we legally have done everything that we should in that process. Once we receive approval from them, we can set a rule-making hearing where the public will have a chance to provide input on the rule changes. That is likely based on when our meeting dates are, that would be our October meeting that we would have rulemaking hearing. If that goes well, then after that, it will go back to the Attorney General's office for a final review and then filed with the Secretary of State. Not until it's filed with the Secretary of State do we know what the effective date is going to be. I believe it's 90 days after being filed with the Secretary of State's office. So in essence, this starts the process that typically lasts anywhere from 9 months to a year before the actual rule is effective. So for those that are watching or listening at a later time, although the board is approving these changes today, the effective date will be sometime in the future and will be discussed at future meetings and of course on our website when we have that type of information available.
Yesterday in our discussions, we talked about applying an effective date. We decided not to do that, to follow the regular process. Do we have anything in this that will allow us to possibly go back and take care of candidates that may have that one part that they have not passed, that where they could come before the board? It seems like that we had some discussion about that yesterday, and we came to the conclusion we did have the ability to do that, just for our listening audience here today.
So in section E of the change to examinations related to the number of months to pass all sections of the exam, in E of that section, it gives the board the authority to extend credit of any individual upon showing that the credit was lost by reason of individual hardship in a variety of items there. What was determined by legal yesterday is that gives the board broad authority to consider and give extensions on a case-by-case basis or to a group of candidates. And so I think it is felt that we start the rulemaking process, and then we also consider potential implementation and effective guidance given by NASBA, and then we determine how to deal with any potential candidates that are in maybe a period that are disadvantaged by the change in the rule. So that will be a future discussion.
So much for that update. Any questions regarding this rule? All right, seeing none. Karen, if you'll go do us a call.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert. Aye. John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe. Gay Moon. Aye. Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
All right, just as a statement of clarification there, we did bring all three rule changes to the floor on that motion, and that is exactly what we just voted on. So I just want to make sure that was clear. But that's what, I implied and what I heard, and just to get it set forth and everybody sees that. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now we have enforcement. Mr. Kevin Monroe. Kevin, I think you whittled us down to where we have a good understanding of everything yesterday, and we've actually passed out the updates. And so I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As the chairman noted yesterday, the enforcement committee met and had extensive discussion on the 16 cases that we're considering today. We made some changes to council or staff's recommendations, and I'll highlight those as we go through. What I'll propose that we do is we take the consent agenda items first, then we'll take the proposed discipline items, and lastly, the one representation case that we have. Legal indicates that for the record, we need to read in the individual case numbers, so we'll go ahead and do that. Note now that in the consent agenda items, there is an additional case number 9. This case was the old item 14. The case number there is 2022040791. The reason it's moving to the consent agenda was because the enforcement committee recommended that we change the proposed penalty from a $500 fine to a letter of warning. And so we actually have 9 cases in the consent agenda. And I'll just read off those case numbers and highlight the changes in recommendations, if any, to the ones that were affected. First case is 2022043121. Next case is 2023002291. The third case is 2022043701. And in that case, we did vote to add to the background of the case yesterday in our discussion to note that the complainant was not a member at the time of the complaint in that particular case. The fourth item is 2022046401. The fifth item is 2022044721. The sixth item is 2022052691. In this particular case, we just had a grammatical edit to add quotation marks around the word repay in the background of the case. That has been done in the revisions that were passed out today. Item 7 is case number 2023001811. Item 8 was case number 2023001801. And in the aforementioned case 2022040791, where the change was to revise the recommended discipline from a $500 fine to a letter of warning. In these cases, essentially we had discussion on each and every one of them, and the option for not only committee members but board members to ask questions, and detailed questions were asked, and we appreciate the help of counsel as well as our investigator who helped to build the documentation around these cases. And the committee recommends approval of the recommended discipline for each of these cases as read.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that comes from the committee, so a second is not required. The non-consent cases, do we have any discussion? Seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe. Gay Moon. Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Thank you. I'll now go ahead and address the proposed discipline cases. These are cases where the Enforcement Committee is recommending particular courses of action, which may include recommendations for fines or other matters. And so, again, there was extensive discussion on each of these cases, and I'll highlight the areas where we made changes to the council and staff's recommendations for disciplinary consideration on the part of the board. Just make sure I'm set here organizationally. Here we go. So under proposed discipline, the first case was number 2023-00191. The general category of this case was lack of due care. There was an ongoing civil dispute between the complainant and the respondent. And so the recommended outcome was to place this in litigation monitoring until the disposition of that civil litigation is completed. The next case is case number 2022033321. This was a particular case where it was alleged that perhaps there was a false tax return filing that was involved. There is litigation around this matter, civil litigation, and so it is recommended that we place this in litigation monitoring as well. It was also noted, and there was some discussion here about whether or not this board should be making a separate referral to law enforcement on this particular case. And it was determined at this time that we would not do so. We would proceed with litigation monitoring and continuing to just follow the case and then follow up as appropriate once that proceeding is dealt with. One additional question to council on this one. This relates to part of the background. Given the decision of the committee here, there was indication in the background that the investigator determined that there may be evidence of possible criminal activity But of course, our investigation did not proceed to really determine that, given the fact that it's in civil litigation. We basically stopped the proceeding. And so the question there would be, do we need to continue in the background to have that statement in the background of the case for the official record, given that the investigation essentially is on hold?
If the board feels that that's not appropriate within the summary, I can go ahead and remove that that sentence from the summary and before we release it as the public.
I'd like to make a comment on that. To me, now you're the attorney, so I would defer to you on this, but to me, if you leave it in there, it looks like that the investigator was recommending that we do something related to criminal activity, which he was. He was recommending that. If we leave it in there, it looks like we just ignored that. And on the next page, it says the recommendation was refer to law enforcement, and then the committee decided to just go with litigation monitoring. My personal opinion is it makes it better if we just remove the reference to the criminal activity, since we're going to leave it in monitoring anyway.
Okay, yeah.
That's just me. I don't know.
We could take that out. That's not a problem.
It does not really change the recommendation on the part of the board here, so I don't think, essentially we'll just remove that as background. I'm comfortable with that.
Change the recommendation to just, if you take that out and then don't change the recommendation.
I would just delete it from both.
Yeah,
that's what the board
That's
prefers.
what I would say.
Yeah, and so the recommendation will remain to place in litigation monitoring, period, on this one. And this was case number 2023000191, in case I missed that reference.
You don't want to ever, and speaking to this, we don't want to ever discourage the investigator from bringing up things like that and bringing it to our attention. I think it gets confusing or a little quirky to mention it in the body here if we're not going to do anything about it, and that we think it's best to remove it. But Duke, I don't want to ever discourage you from bringing that up to us.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. That the case number that we're discussing now is actually case number 2022033211. Okay.
I'm not saying that nothing will be done about it. We're just saying by leaving it in monitoring, it will play itself out.
That's right.
I have that noted down to go ahead and remove that from the summary and from the recommendation as well before it's released on the website.
Thank you, Taylor. We'll proceed to the next case item. Yes. Absolutely.
I don't want to ever think that if we've got some really good experience right now, and if our investigator or prior past or in the future, if they see things that they think that may like that don't believe.
Mr. Chairman, would you mind to hit record or speak? I'm sorry.
Okay. Sorry. So that we would encourage them to report that in some way, shape, or form to another body, because if we come across something, it seems logical that we should pass that on while we're in the process of looking at the case.
And I would generally agree. And I think the discussion that we had yesterday was along the lines that once the civil litigation is complete, as we follow up in our litigation monitoring, if we determine based on the outcome and the facts that we have that we should proceed with that, we will do so. The issue here that we had discussion on was that we really, once we kind of made a determination to move to a litigation monitoring mode, the investigation per se was not, completed to its normal completion. And so we don't really have a basis for proceeding, if you will, at this point on our side. That was kind of the gist of the discussion as I took it, Mr. Chairman.
We did not want to be premature in our actions.
So,
kind of just an update to share the fact that we still had that in the back of our mind, that we're going to look at that in the future.
it is out there once the results of that litigation are brought to a conclusion. The next case, item 12, and there are 4 case numbers associated with it, was an extensive case. The case numbers are 2022034971, 2022034981, 2022034991, and 2022035001. And the basis for this case coming before the board was the fact that the respondent was the subject of discipline by the Securities and Exchange Commission for violations based on allegations that the respondent encouraged and facilitated cheating on the AICPA ethics exam and the knowledge assessments part of CPE courses that were offered to that firm's employees. As a result of that, the SEC and the respondent firm entered into a significant consent order that involved, among other things, a $100 million fine and a number of remedial steps to address the issues from a control perspective and an ethics and integrity perspective on the part of the responding firm. Subsequent to that, then the respondent firm, as they agreed to do, notified various boards of accountancy whether or not there were violations that could potentially be associated with employees that were licensed in the state of, in our case, Tennessee. And as it turned out, there were no apparent violations relative to the taking of the AICPA ethics exam element of this particular part of the consent order or issue with the Securities and Exchange Commission. However, there were a number of potential violations relating to those that either obtained or passed on to others answer keys for assessments resulting from internal CPE courses that were sponsored by the respondent. After significant discussion, yesterday it was the committee's recommendation to, let me just get the exact wording here, would be to, I mentioned that there were 4 complaints and 4 complaint numbers. Those were relative to the 4 firms that were part of the respondent's business here in Tennessee. It was determined that of those 4, 2 of the 4 firms had no individual violations associated with them. And so the recommendation is for closing the complaints relative to the 2 offices without any identified employees that took place in these activities. Additionally, authorizing a formal hearing with the authority to settle via a consent order upon the respondent's payment of a civil penalty in the amount of $43,000 for the 2 offices with the employees identified, and opening new complaints against 2 employees or 2 identified individuals who alleged to have egregiously shared answer keys. In both of those cases, answer keys were shared in excess of 20 times for each of those individuals. So that is the recommendation that the committee has approved for board consideration. Just as a reminder, the previous recommendation from staff was a civil penalty in the amount of $28,000, and we had considerable discussion about whether to do this on a per individual basis or a per occurrence basis, and ultimately we settled upon the $43,000 proposed civil penalty. That was a very extensive case that involved a lot of discussion, but I've tried to synopsize that, and let me just stop there to see if there are any questions or concerns in the way that we presented the committee's recommendation there.
This is Janet, and I have a comment, concern. This case, I guess in thinking about it more since the meeting, it really deeply bothered me because of the implications that it has to our profession, the trustworthiness and integrity of our profession. And to me, that is just so extremely important. And relative to opening complaints against the two individuals who egregiously shared the keys, I think complaints should be open against any of them. I don't know how many of them it was. I don't think just because you cheat more that that's really, really bad, but you don't cheat as much or lie as much, that's not as bad and perhaps shouldn't have consequences. And I just feel like that sends the wrong message. And it also got me to thinking about our whistleblower processes that are in place, say with NASBA, the TSCPA, the board, and I'm not sure what those are because if there are such systemic issues going on in firms, whistleblowing is often sometimes it's the only way that this kinds of things it protects our profession. So I guess to summarize, one, I think if we're going to open complaints against any of these cheaters, we need to open it against all of them. I guess that's my biggest complaint, and I would like to understand what our whistleblower practices are.
Thank you, Janet. I guess I'll talk to the first item, and then other committee and board members can chime in on this as we address this. One of the considerations that came up in the discussion yesterday, as well as in the background materials that were placed before the board, was that for the employees that committed these violations, not just the two that we are recommending opening complaints against, but the other participants in this, the part of that background and part of the response on the part of the responding firm to the SEC consent order was that they have imposed internal discipline on the employees, at least that were still employed by the respondent firm. That included ranges of actions from cuts in salary, if you will, demotion or delay in promotion with respect to these employees. Now, in some cases, these employees were no longer employed by the firm by the time these actions were uncovered, and so the respondent firm had no ability to really impose additional sanctions on them. But for those that remained with the responding firm, there was a regime, if you will, of accountability that was applied not just to, the two that were contemplating opening complaints against, one of whom is, we believe, still employed by the responding firm, the other is not, but that they had undergone a disciplinary process as a result of those activities. And I think the committee, in the deliberations that we had yesterday, the committee, at least at that time, was comfortable proceeding on that basis and really working with the two that had filed, in each case, more than 3 times the number of the next highest number of answer keys that were forwarded to others. And again, there was no violation with respect to the underlying AICPA ethics exam with respect to that. And so I think that's just a matter of the board's going to need to determine, Janet, after your input, where they sit with respect to whether they want to open up additional complaints or not. And then with respect to the whistleblower issues, I'll turn it over to Wendy to speak to anything that the board may have or that TSCPA may have based on their knowledge. But part of the consent order, I believe, was to strengthen the ethics and integrity reporting in the responding firm to better address, both deter and prevent those kinds of activities.
I think I'd ask Janet to maybe further explain on the whistleblower? I'm not sure I know how to answer that question with regard to the board or legal division.
I guess one thing that and I guess in whistleblower types of situations is that it's clear how ethical issues or other issues can be reported and how that process works. So I don't know if the board has or if there's a hotline with the board staff or even with the TSCPA or NASBA, how that reporting is communicated such that people would know who to call or how to make that issue known or reported.
Or the PCAOB, right? Wouldn't the PCAOB play a role here in whistleblowing? Do they have a reporting process?
I don't know that I can speak to that. I'm not sure. But I think what you're getting at, Janet, is somebody's ability to let the board know that something's occurring that they feel like is a violation. And
yes, and I don't mean to put anybody on the spot. I just think that in situations where there's a systemic failure, oftentimes whistleblowing processes are the only way that these things come to light. And it's just so important that those processes are in place.
So,
and people know about them.
You know, with regard to the way we operate, if somebody feels that there's a violation of a law or rule related to the conduct of a CPA or CPA firm, they would be encouraged to file a complaint with this board, and they're typically directed to the online complaint process. We typically encourage folks to provide any and all information that they can because that assists us in investigating the complaint and to make determinations. However, if you don't provide, you can submit an anonymous complaint online if you don't necessarily want to be known that you're filing the complaint. It does make it harder for us to, if there's not specific information provided, it makes it difficult for us to investigate, but it is an option if somebody wants to do it that way. Sometimes we receive anonymous things in the mail that we then open a complaint because we've received something in the mail, sometimes from an anonymous source, and we'll open a complaint. Typically, if anything comes into our office related to an allegation that's documented, we are required to open the complaint. So I don't review things and say, I don't think this is a big deal, we're not going to open a complaint. It is a process by which it's more of an automatic thing.
And I think in addition, I'm sorry, go ahead, Janet.
I was just going to say, I think some companies have policies, whistleblower policies, that they have implemented, and they're very formalized types of policies. I don't know if we have those policies or not, but
I'm not familiar that we have as a department or even the state has policies, but I'll let Taylor speak to.
Yeah, I haven't done much research into whistleblowing policies, but I can look into that and provide a more detailed answer. I can provide it to Wendy, and she can provide it to the board at some point after this meeting. I know that whistleblowers are federally protected. I don't know enough information to speak on it in depth, but if that's something that the board wants me to look into and get a more detailed answer and provide some more information to Wendy, I'm happy to do so.
Thank you, Taylor. I think one other comment that I would make here, as part of the consent order, the respondent had to revise their educational delivery system in order to make it more difficult for employees to share answer keys. They now require their professionals to take specific training courses on the topic of integrity, ethics, and honesty in taking assessments. This is reinforced through the respondent's new requirement that its people certify in writing before taking internal assessments that they are completing the assessments on their own. And they also revised their policy on learning to confirm that they have zero tolerance for cheating on any learning, including by expressly referencing their prohibition against cheating. In addition, the respondent to the respondent's annual Global Code of Conduct certification, they have further implemented a required pledge in which its people promise to live the respondent's values, including a commitment never to cheat, and that this pledge is renewed annually. These are just some of the steps that were part of the consent order that the respondent firm agreed to. And I think also, Janet, going back to the issue of opening up complaints against the other folks that were not as heavily involved, allegedly involved in this, it was noted also that most of these people were below the level of manager. There was no senior manager or partner or principal level involvement, at least among Tennessee licensees associated with the respondent firm here. And I know, at least to me personally, that was one of the factors here in the consideration about, how far and to what degree to pursue all of these. And in my view, the fact that there was an internal mechanism for meting out discipline by the responding firm after this came to light, and the fact that we clearly had two individuals that differentiated themselves in terms of the manner and frequency with which they shared answer keys, that for me, and I think for the committee, got us comfortable with where we were at to recommend opening complaints against just the two. But let me stop there and see if there are other comments or questions.
Mr. Chairman, and this is probably a question for legal, but when you were reading the committee's recommendation, you included a word which I think is appropriate, but is not in the written committee recommendation, and that is on the last line of the committee recommendation. It says identified individuals who egregiously shared answer keys, and Chairman Monroe used the word allegedly egregiously shared, and I think that's appropriate. I don't know that we need a formal amendment to do that, but
yeah, if that's something you would like to include, we can include that. That's something we can include since it's an opening a new complaint. We can add that into there.
Okay. What I would suggest in terms of a course of action is that as a board, we go ahead. There's clearly been a lot of discussion both yesterday and today on this case, is that we go ahead and vote on the recommendation for this case separately and deal with that at this time since the discussion is current and germane, and then we'll go back to the remaining cases and collectively vote on those. Is that acceptable, Mr. Chairman? All right. Are there any further comments, questions, or discussions on this particular case?
So is legal going to change that in both the legal recommendation and the committee?
I will update both, yeah.
Okay.
So just to recap, then the revised recommendation that the board will be voting on will read, closing the complaint specific to the two offices without any identified employees. Additionally, authorizing a formal hearing with the authority to settle via a consent order upon the respondent's payment of a civil penalty in the amount of $43,000 for the two offices with the employees identified, and opening new complaints against the two identified individuals who allegedly egregiously shared answer keys.
This is Janet. Can I ask one other question about those all the employees? Are they all still licensed in Tennessee, or do we know that? What the ones who egregiously shared or did not egregiously share? Are they still licensed in Tennessee?
Yes, it was determined, Janet, that the two that were the egregious sharers, alleged egregious sharers of the answer keys, are still actively licensed in Tennessee. One, as far as we know, is employed, continuing to be employed by the respondent. The other is not.
What about the others? Do we know if the others who didn't egregiously share are still licensed and employed in Tennessee?
I don't know about the remaining 26, but in terms of the licenses, they were active at the time the investigation was ongoing.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. Any further questions or comments? So we have a motion, I think, since this is a modification of the committee recommendation, I'd ask for a second on this one. Is there a second?
Second.
You have a second. Is there any further discussion? So, Karen, if you'll call the roll, we're dealing with the case that is, let me just read the case number here. It is 202203497. Well, there are four cases. 4971, 4981, 4991, and 5001. That's the one that we're voting on.
Andy Bonner. Janet Booker Davis.
No.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore. Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Thank you. That motion passes, but I appreciate the heartfelt comments, both pro and con, in terms of the discussion of this case, because it's probably, in my mind, one of the most far-reaching and intricate cases in terms of involving the number of employees arising out of one set of facts that we've dealt with, at least during my tenure on the board. So I appreciate everybody's willingness to contribute their views and ask questions to the discussion, because I think that just helps us collectively hopefully arrive at a fair outcome. The next item here is case number 20220511351. This was a case that involved failure to renew a firm permit and therefore operating without a valid firm permit and advertising a test services without a valid permit or signing up for peer review. As it turned out, there were no attest services actually provided. There was the firm, once this was brought to their attention, remedied the issue very quickly. But given the fact that there was a lapse of time between firm permit expiration and renewal, the committee ultimately decided to change the recommended counsel's discipline from $500 to $1,000. So the new recommendation here is authorizing a formal hearing with the authority to settle via consent order upon the respondent's payment of a civil penalty in the amount of $1,000. We'll go ahead and proceed to the next case, and again, we'll collectively vote on all the proposed discipline cases except the one that we've just voted on. The next item is case number 2022051-961. This was a situation that involved an independence violation, including self-reviewing one's own work. The committee's recommendation was for a $1,000 fine. There were no changes to that recommendation from council. The next item is, item 14, the old item 14 was moved to the consent agenda, so we've dealt with that. So the next item is case number 2023-001491. This involved a CPE violation and a lack of candor when renewing the license. The original council's recommendation was for a $1,000 fine. After discussion, the committee voted to raise that civil penalty to $1,500, and I'll read the entire committee recommendation here with the revision included. That is to authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle via consent order upon the respondent's payment of a civil penalty in the amount of $1,500. Additionally, council recommends requiring respondent to complete the outstanding 23 hours of continuing education for the 2020-2021 cycle within 30 days of executing the consent order, and for the respondent to be included in the next continuing education audit. So the change from the original recommendation that the committee recommends was to move the civil penalty from $1,000 to $1,500. So that concludes the presentation of the proposed discipline cases. We've already voted on the case number dealing with the SEC consent order. So I would put forward a motion that we approve the committee's recommendations for the remaining cases in the proposed discipline section.
All right, so we have a motion from the committee. We don't need a second. Is there any further discussion?
Voting on all these in one.
Yes, except for the one that involved the SEC consent that we just voted on separately. If you'd like to pull one out separately or more than one, we can do so.
I'd like to pull 14 out.
Okay, is that the case that number that ends in 1961?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, so we're going to pull that case out. We have a motion to pull that case out from it. Do I have a second?
I'll second it to allow for discussion.
Make sure we do it correctly. We'll vote now on just pulling that one case out from the motion that was made from the committee. So with that, Karen, if you'll just do a roll call on pulling that one case out, and then we'll come back and deal with the rest of them.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Thank you. So that motion passes. So what I would suggest is that we go ahead and deal with this case 1961.
Well, that was just to pull 1961 out.
Right.
Our motion from the committee, so we amended your motion.
Okay.
In the process, since it already brought with the motion.
Okay.
So now what we'll do is we'll go ahead and approve the rest of them. So we follow Robert's Rules of Orders.
Very
So
well.
Now we'll approve the others with that one pulled out now. And so roll call.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Not sure what we're voting on.
Voting on approving all of the other cases except for the SEC and
Number 14.
14.
Oh, we already voted on that.
No, that was just to amend. We had to amend the motion that was sitting out there. So that was to amend that motion by pulling that out.
Okay.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Thank you. So that has been accepted. So what we have remaining before us in the proposed discipline section is item 14, which is the case 2022051961. That will be addressed separately now. And the committee's recommendation did not change from the original council's recommendation here for a $1,000 fine on this particular matter. Is there any comment or question or discussion?
I didn't want to discuss it anymore. I was just going to vote no on this one, so I didn't want it in the group.
Okay.
I just didn't feel like the penalty was high enough on this one. I agree with everything except the size of the penalty.
Okay.
Any further discussion on this one? Seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore. Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe. Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
Thank you. We have one last case, Mr. Chairman, and that is a representation case, item 16, case number 2022-034181. A representation is a situation where new facts or circumstances come to light, and it is recommended that the board consider or reconsider its prior decision or outcome. In this particular case, which involved a situation where the respondent's firm name was inappropriately using an accounting designation in violation of TCA rules, the original recommendation was to authorize a hearing to settle via consent order requiring the respondent to remove the term accountant or accounting from their firm name, website, and all other sites. The new information that occurred was that the council has learned that the respondent had not received all previous information sent to them relative to this complaint, as it appeared that prior counsel had respondent's name written down incorrectly. So once counsel sent the respondent all of the documents pertaining to the complaint, respondent did contact counsel and sought information on how to come into compliance promptly. Respondent has since provided counsel with evidence of the name change from their bank account, their LinkedIn page, and their LLC registration with the Secretary of State. They've also confirmed that their website has been modified to remove the term accounting. And they also apologized for their mistake, explaining that they were not aware of the restrictions in the word accounting. So the new recommendation was the council recommends closing the complaint with a letter of warning as it pertains to title or designation. The matters have already been corrected. The committee's recommendation was to concur in council's recommendation. And so with that, that is the committee's recommendation on this item.
All right, so it comes from, as a committee motion. It doesn't need a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none.
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Aye.
Greg Gilbert, John Griesbeck, Kevin Monroe,
Aye.
Gay Moon,
Aye.
Rob Vance,
Aye.
Judy Weatherby,
Aye.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to stay on enforcement just for a second. One of the things I noticed yesterday as I was listening to your committee kind of present and discuss, there was a lot of talk about penalties and how that several of the members felt like that the penalties weren't high enough. I know that I had been on the board here for 6 years. Not once have I seen those penalties addressed, updated. We've been through a kind of a time frame here that indicates that we've had inflation. Obviously, the starting salaries have been adjusted, and salaries in the industry have been adjusted due to pipeline and just due to the need of getting good qualified people in the seat. Also, that has adjusted is firm fees. And it seems to be relevant that if we're going to maintain a penalty associated with something that a firm or an individual is doing wrong, that the penalty needs to sting or hurt a little bit, and it probably needs to be updated because we're always referring to this is what we normally charge, this is what the fee we normally have. And I would ask our executive director, does she have any thoughts there? And if we do want to bring such an update to this board to challenge the fees that we're currently issuing associated with penalties or items within the committee, how should we go about that?
In thinking through this, I think if the board is interested in revisiting kind of the civil penalties that we assess depending on the violation, I think, and I'll let legal give some input, but I think my recommendation would be to revisit the discipline matrix, and so maybe if that is the feeling of the board, I think we can go back and look at the discipline matrix and maybe make some revisions that we might bring back to you at the next meeting that you could review, and we could adopt a new discipline matrix, which maybe changes those things to maybe set a new standard going forward.
Yeah, Wendy's exactly on point. That's what we would do. We would go ahead and review and edit the discipline matrix. We can work on it together, and if there's one board member that wants to volunteer to give some input on that, we would greatly be open to that, and then it would be represented to you at the following meeting where you guys can vote to adopt that.
Had we officially voted on that? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's been a number of years.
Okay.
But yes,
I know
in order to use that, we had to get the board to approve it. Yes.
Yeah. So we would make any changes or any suggested changes to that, represent it to you. You guys would have the opportunity to vote on it. I think board input on the editing of it would be great. So I don't know if anybody wants to volunteer themselves for that, but.
What does the board think here? Any comments?
I would strongly support that. I don't think there's much of anything that wouldn't deserve more than $500 for a penalty. And we got several things that we assessed $500 for, and that may have been relevant 10 years ago, but a $500 penalty for most of the things we talk about now is peanuts. So I would support that.
Comments?
My recollection is that in the year prior to your coming on the board, Mr. Chairman, Gabe Roberts assisted mightily and basically worked with staff to develop the matrix that was approved. And so it has been 7 years since we've looked at that.
I think it'd been Gabe and Ben at the time. I can't remember his last name.
I can't remember.
Is committee chair and enforcement, Mr. Monroe, would you like to be our board representative to be engaged in that discussion?
Be happy to. Look forward to working with council and Wendy on that.
So I will take it that the board is in full support of that. Do I hear any nays? All right. Wendy?
Do you think we need a motion and a direction?
Yes,
Yeah,
I
okay.
believe so. Yeah,
I think so. I think it would be appropriate for a vote on that.
Okay.
I agree.
I would make it a motion, or I will ask for a motion since I'm the chair to go in that direction.
Make a motion that we direct legal and our executive director and Mr. Monroe to pursue reviewing our current penalty matrix structure to evaluate whether they should be amended, and if so, make some recommendations to the board.
Second.
Any further discussion? Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Monroe, again, for your leadership in that area and a job well done.
Well, thank you, and thanks everybody for their participation and discussion, and the questions, and the both those that dissented on some votes and those that voted in the affirmative. I think this board is collectively at its best when we combine the experiences of all 11 members, and hopefully we get to a fair outcome on an overall basis.
The executive committee met yesterday. We got a report from our executive director who updated us on travel and actually talked about the different meetings that were attended by our investigator and our executive director. And we also got an update on our financial statements, which were duly noted yesterday in the meetings. We got an update of what areas we may be over budget, specifically with the salary restructuring in Tennessee and the effects of that on our budget. And so at the executive committee, does anybody else have anything to add to that? Well, I would make a motion to approve the what we brought forth yesterday in the executive committee of updated financial statements and travel. It doesn't need a second. Any discussion? I'll accept that.
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church.
Aye.
David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
Gay Moon.
Aye.
Rob Vance.
Aye.
Judy Weatherby.
But next, we're going to move forward to NASBA updates. I really don't have anything to add from the board meeting. I think Dan did a very good job at explaining almost everything that he went over. We talked very much so in the board meetings. We had a very lively discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
it appears that we are through on voting items. I've got to run to a TSCPA meeting in Brentwood. Could I be excused, please?
Yes, sir, Mr. Vance. Thank you very much for your participation today and safe travels.
Only BTSCPA that I would leave for. So.
Okay. So I would say that NASBA had a very robust discussion in our board meeting a couple of weeks ago or last week, and it was very much some exciting news that came out. Dan did a great job of covering that, so I really don't have anything to add to our board meeting because of everything that was discussed. I would ask that, I did learn in that meeting, and I'm going to here again. I did it yesterday. I'm going to do it again today. Larry Elmore did a great job on the UAA committee with great input. The thing that is we're so blessed at Tennessee Board is that we have people that are involved in committees. I was able to reach out to Larry before I went to the board meeting and say, hey, what did your committee talk about? What did y'all decide? And he had input and shared thoughts with me and pretty much pegged what he thought was going to happen actually happened, which was very thoughtful on your part to have the vision to see that coming. And I would say that that experience and that knowledge being brought back to this board is very much appreciated, and we appreciate the involvement there. So with that, I would say, anybody have any committee updates for NASBA that you currently sit on?
Andy, I'm on CBT, the administration of the exam, and we've said most of what we'd consider. Now Wendy's on it too, and that's really cool. But and then I was on the transition task force for moving to the new CPA evolution format of the CPA exam. So, and then we have this meeting coming up in North Carolina in just a couple of weeks. But everything is intertwined. So what we have discussed in the task force and CBT has been, first of all, we were doing this new format of the exam, and our transition task force talked about what do we do with BEC, and there was a lot of robust discussion about that, and out of that came the recommendation to let people keep that for the part of one of the core parts, and that was very controversial. And now we're dealing with, okay, are we going to have, when will we have enough people to norm, or whatever we call it, score the new exams? Will there be enough people taking it? Because that sort of pulls some people out of that first round of takers. That's not unrelated to this idea of amnesty. Didn't I read that 15,000 people would be affected if we grant this amnesty provision? And I thought, well, what's that going to do to the first round of takers of the CPA exam? Anyway, in this meeting coming up in North Carolina, we're discussing the amnesty provision and the 30 credits, and I guess the transition to that. So it's been very interesting to hear all the debate leading up to this, and so I'll be interested to see what direction the discussion goes in there. But anyway, that's what I've been listening to and participating in.
Would you like to add anything to that, Wendy?
No, sir.
Look, Dr. Church, we appreciate your participation. Help us to understand in that committee.
Very active participant. You said that she's so good. People trust her, and they look to her for advice and input. So,
any others?
Mr. Chairman, I serve on the ethics committee, and actually Dan will do a much better job presenting this synopsis than me, but I will share with you what's going on with the ethics committee. We had 2 meetings in the month of April. The first was on April 10th, and we reviewed ISBA's proposed revision to its code addressing tax planning. Those of us who practice tax planning in the United States know that we have AICPA Code of Ethics to deal with, as well as IRS Circular 230, and ISBA has proposed its own set of rules regarding those. So we'll actually have 3 sets of rules regarding tax planning in the future. We also, at that April 10th meeting, discussed PEAK's interpretation on CPA exam, and CPE cheating, which is germane to what we dealt with today, I think. And then we had a second meeting on April 25th. Dan was kind enough to ask Kathy Allen to lead a discussion regarding PEAK's simultaneous employment task force. And we also reviewed PEAK's interpretation on fees, auditing fees primarily, and then discussed ISBA's proposed strategy and work plan.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add just to piggyback on Greg's comments. First of all, to note that I don't think you've noted this in a meeting, Chairman Bonner, but you serve on PEAK currently as the regulatory representative. So that's great representation. As has been done in the past, I have encouraged Duke to start attending the PEAK meetings as well. And I do when I can, but often conflicts with some other things that I have going on. But just to keep an ear out for things that are going on and whether those things affect our rules, you know, do we need to make changes to our rules based on decisions made by PEAK or ISBA or in that nature? So expect to see Duke on those meetings going forward.
Very exciting. I was just listening to comment about the fact that anybody can sign up and receive CPE credit by attending the PEAK meetings. It's an online, you virtually come in, you get a copy of the agenda. The agenda actually goes into detail about what's being presented, and then they give a presentation of that, so you have good advanced reading. Actually, there is one coming up on May the 9th and May the 10th. They're open meetings. Of course, we have a closed meeting where we have enforcement issues to deal with. But I didn't realize that you could actually join the meetings and get CPE credit, and you get a little poll in front of you that you have to click to say that you're there. But it's very informative of what's going on in our profession. I'm actually on the simultaneous employment task force, and so I've gotten to work with Miss Allen as she brings us through that, and we talk about it. In fact, we have a meeting this week. So there's a lot of good things going on. I know Dan's heavily involved in that, and we touch base with him, and as you do on your committee, to get updates of his thoughts. I would highly encourage anybody listening here today, or even the board members, that that's a great way to understand what's going on in our profession, and amongst all the other opportunities. But that one's a great opportunity to get CPE credit too. So,
Mr. Chairman, I would also like to thank Dan. I should have done this earlier, but for all the work that you do and helping guide the ethics committee, your work is very much appreciated.
all right, any other further committees to update?
I'll mention that Mr. Monroe and I serve on the Regulatory Response Committee, and as we've sort of mentioned before, our role is to assist NASBA's leadership in providing timely responses to professional practice developments, reviewing other committees' responses, or developing our own. And this past few months with busy season, we had a little bit less activity, which was, I guess, welcome, Kevin, right? But there were 3. One of them was a PCOB issuance regarding use of confirmation. There was updating on important element of our audit work. Government auditing standards update, primarily related to quality management standards, monitoring, engagement, quality review. And unusually, sort of, we actually had an accounting topic this time that we generally don't have responses to by NASBA necessarily for consideration, but it related to accounting for and disclosure of crypto assets. So it was an enlightening discussion, and in a nutshell, the thought is to move these to fair value accounting as opposed to treatment as an it's a little bit different for an intangible asset. So, sit and wait on that one. It should be interesting, the developments to come forward.
I'm on the communications committee, and about the only thing that we communicated on is all the people that were involved that were in tax wanted to delay that meeting. So we aren't. I don't have anything to report, but I will say that I served on that ethics committee for several years, and that is a very intense but very informing and informative. And Kathy Allen, does she still chair that, or do you do it, Dan? Oh, she's no longer on the committee. Well, I'm telling you, she was fantastic on that committee.
Over to Pink, and she is a true leader.
Okay, that's the way she was on ethics.
And when Kathy speaks, people stop and listen.
Exactly,
so
exactly.
She carries that forward.
I tout her effectiveness and her communication and her ability to just serve this profession and offer up everything she has all the way around. So.
Other discussion or other comments on committees? All right. Next, we'll go over to the legislative update from legal counsel, and I'll ask Taylor if you have anything to add there. Or...
There is no legislative update other than session is over. They called a special session, but it shouldn't affect this board, so there are no legislative updates on our end.
Just to confirm, as far as I know, we haven't received the final report yet, but there was no legislation passed that affects our board, either specifically or as a regulatory board in general. So we don't expect any changes.
Business. I'll start out there by just saying that, it's such a pleasure to serve with leaders in our profession across the state. I've had the ability to serve our board members, but I came on the board. You kind of go, okay, who's on the board? Do you know this person? You know that person? And I got here, everybody was talking about Gay Moon and what she brought to the table. How at that time when I came in, she was secretary, and how she went back through and listened to the dedication, the knowledge of the profession, the leadership that she brought. She is just she has been such a leader in our world. She has reached her max in serving on our board. This is her 9th year. I'll be reappointed, but at the same all that you've done, I have something out to you is of and a contribution. A board of accountancy think.
Well, I appreciate that. This has been a true honor and privilege. I think I'm the only one that remembers before pre-Wendy being our executive director, and I am so grateful that you came on board, and you have been so instrumental in the success of this board, and you've made our jobs easier. As far as my fellow board members, I have gotten to work with some of the top professionals in this in accounting, and we've been cohesive, but we have strived to maintain the high standards that are expected in this profession. But mixing in with that, I've seen a lot of compassion and wanting to see our licensees excel and do the right thing. So it has been an honor. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the board, I'm going to walk this over and give it to you. We have a nice little case to put in it. Out of here with that. Your family.
got it on, but it's okay. There it goes. I would also like to propose that perhaps, when's our next meeting? Maybe if it works, sometime when it works with Gay's schedule, but then, an after hours on Monday evening or whatever, however that works, I would like to honor Gay and all of us perhaps get together at my place again. And all the new people like Duke and Taylor, I don't think you came last time, but you need to come. But I would like to do that. I have thoroughly enjoyed getting to know Gay, working with Gay, traveling with Gay, all those good things. We've had a good time, haven't we, Janet? Is she still there?
Oh. I am still here, okay. And yes, we have had a great time.
Okay. I hope you'll get out for when we do get together, Janet.
Well, I am planning to get out, okay. and I would like to say to Gay that I think you've been on the board the whole time that I've been on it so far. I'll miss you when you're gone because I'll be on it without you now. But appreciate all your work, your knowledge, your insightfulness, thoughtfulness, and all your work and service to the profession. Thank you so much.
I wish you were here, Janet. I'd love to see you.
Janet doesn't really exist. She's just on the recording on there.
I'm just virtual.
Are we allowed to say something about Gay while we're here?
Please speak
up. I'm speaking. I'm like the short guy that you tell to stand up. Well, I want to tell a story. First, and I've warned her about this. She doesn't know what it is, though. First thing I'll say is I do appreciate all she's done for the board. Gay and I have enjoyed comparing grandchildren pictures over the years, and I've advised her how to be a good grandparent. But, and I think she's probably doing a good job. Anyway, she was the first board member I met out here in the lobby, I guess you might call it. Janet and I came on the same year. And so when we got here for our first day of training, we were out here waiting for the person to come and take us to another room. So Gay kind of received us and gave us a few pointers on being a board member and so forth. That's not what I wanted to tell. Last year when we all went to Greenbrier, for those of you that have never been to Greenbrier, that's where the NASBA Eastern Regional was last year. So when we got there, there was lots of things to do and on the agenda and so forth. One of the things you could do was there was a movie theater in the building down in the basement, and nobody ever used it. I guess because nobody knew it was there, but it was an old time screen. Wasn't real good. The picture wasn't real good. But anyway, when we went to dinner one night, somebody said, well, they're showing an old James Bond movie in the theater tonight. And we found out that Gay loves James Bond movies. So this particular one, she really wanted us all to go to. So some of us reluctantly agreed to go. So after dinner, we rushed back to get there so we could see the movie because it started at a certain time. We walked into the theater thinking that we'll have to find a seat. So we walked in and there's nobody in there but us. The whole theater was empty, but the movie was showing. So we all spread out and took separate seats, since we had the whole theater, we just, one here and one here and one there. And so as time went by, people started leaving. Greg left, Andy left, everybody got sleepy and left. And Gay was sitting like over here from where I was. And it was Kevin, Andy, and Greg, and Wendy and I guess. So anyway, it got down to just me and Gay. And I thought, well, I don't want to leave her in here all by herself, so I'll keep staying. So as time went by, I fell asleep. Because if you put me in a dark room, I'm going to go to sleep. So I sat there the whole time thinking that Gay was enjoying this movie while I slept. And when I got up and the thing was over, I turned around and she's gone. And I'm thinking, I sat here all night long for her benefit, and she went to bed.
I got tired. I'd seen the movie before. I knew how it ended.
Well, I kind of expected you to peck me on the shoulder and say, hey, I'm leaving. You want to go too?
You looked comfortable.
So anyway, thank you, Gay, for your service. And I'm 1 year behind you next year, so thank you very much.
Chairman, I'd just add, when I joined the board, Charles Frazier said, well, you're really going to enjoy working with Gay Moon. I'm trying to imitate him as best I can. And he then managed to just sing your praises as one of the most outstanding tax professionals he had ever known in his career. And coming from Charles, that's really, really high praise. And just seeing the way that you mentioned empathy and compassion in your comments, and to see the way that you handled the cases that came before this board with that empathy and compassion really means a lot to us all, and particularly personally to me. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would echo that. I think you are really a good example of combining the high standards of professionalism and the compassion and empathy for each individual. And I also want to add, I really appreciate your passion for the new entrants into our profession, and making sure that they are treated fairly, and that you listen to them. So you have always had your finger on the pulse of the new entrants, just like you said today, that some of them had shared with you that they really appreciated this extension to 30 months. And I think, that goes beyond your responsibilities here. It's a personal passion, and I really appreciate that.
This morning I said to Gay, I guess this is your last meeting. And she said, well, officially, yes, they haven't replaced me. And I said, Gay, have you considered the fact that you might be irreplaceable? And she said, no, but, I'm sure you probably are in a lot of ways, not just on this board, but in your firm and, in your family's lives. And while I haven't served with you as long as some others, I've been very impressed with your professionalism, your straightforward, even-tempered responses and approach to the issues that we deal with. And I know you've got some grandkids out there that you love and cherish, and wish you the best, and spending time with them and whatever the years ahead bring to you. So thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Gay, you've been the longest serving board member since I've been here, so I will truly miss you. We've traveled together, shared pictures, that kind of thing. I don't think I've ever seen anyone happier in retirement than you. But I so appreciate, as others have said, your contribution to this board, to me individually. Your tax expertise has been invaluable as we worked through certain cases. You may not always have something to say, but when you say it, it is important and it matters. So thank you very much.
Lindy.
Okay, I also thank you for your service. And I suppose when I first came on the board, you were serving as secretary, and I was immediately impressed when you told me that you went back and watched the video of all the board meetings to make sure that the minutes were correct. And I think Larry continued that tradition, and then I've tried to continue it also, but you taught us well, and thank you for your leadership.
All right. Well, we've come to that point in the day that is there any other old or new business that we need to consider here at the board? Well, then I would ask the Honorable Gay Moon if she would like to make a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
With that, Thank you very much. We appreciate your time, your effort, your dedication to the profession. We appreciate our speakers today to come and update us on what's going on in our profession from NASPA and also from the Tennessee Society of CPAs. And we appreciate our staff. Thank you for all that you do. This would not be possible. Our legal team, our investigator, and just a great 2 days of discussions. And I was very impressed, as Larry said yesterday, at the responses we got from our legal team and from our investigator and how quick it was. And we just really appreciate that. So with that, have a safe trip home. And I'm sure we'll be in touch with the ever-changing profession and things going on. But we will see y'all physically in July. Thank you.